The last time Ronan Voss cried, he was standing over a small white casket in the rain, and he made himself a promise. Never again. 8 years later, he walks into a roadside diner outside Flagstaff with the kind of face that makes strangers look away. And a 7-year-old girl walks straight toward him like she's been searching for him her whole short life. She sets a faded pink backpack on the table between them. Doesn't ask permission, doesn't flinch at the scars. Just looks him dead in the eye and says, "You look like someone who knows what it feels like to lose something." Outside, 40 Harleys sit cooling in the morning frost. Inside, something Ronan buried 8 years ago begins to move. If this story breaks something open in your chest, stay with it until the end. Hit that like button, drop your city in the comments, and let's ride. Let's go. The diner was called Maze, and it had no business still being open. The sign out front had lost 2 letters sometime around 2019, and nobody had bothered to replace them, so it read MEs in cracked red neon that buzzed like a dying insect every time the temperature dropped below 40. The parking lot was cracked asphalt patched with gravel, the kind that crunched under boot heels in a way that announced every arrival and every departure. The booths inside were red vinyl repaired with electrical tape. The coffee was bad. The pie was worse. Ronan Voss had been coming here every Thursday morning for 4 years. He didn't come for the food. He came because it was the only place within 60 miles where nobody talked to him unless he started the conversation first, and he never started the conversation. The waitress, a woman named Deb, late 50s, silver braid, forearms like she'd worked a ranch until a ranch worked her back, had understood this about him from the first Thursday. She brought his coffee black without asking. She refilled it without comment. When other customers glanced at the scar that ran from his left ear down beneath the collar of his jacket and asked her about it in hushed voices, she said, "He's a regular," and turned back to the counter. That was enough. That was all he'd ever needed from another human being in the last 8 years. The dignity of being left alone with his black coffee and whatever occupied the space behind his eyes on Thursday mornings. Outside, the 40 bikes belonging to the Black Forge riders occupied the lot in a loose formation that was somehow both relaxed and deliberate, the way a pride of lions looks casual until the exact moment it doesn't. The men who rode them were inside at 2 other booths and the counter, eating eggs and not talking much. This was also ritual. Ronan rode in, they rode behind. Ronan ate alone, they clustered nearby. Not bodyguards, not handlers. Something older than that. Something without a clean word in any language. Family, maybe. The kind that doesn't ask to be called that. It was the 3rd Thursday of October, and the sky over northern Arizona was the color of old pewter, the kind of sky that promises nothing good and delivers on that promise by noon. The wind came down off the high desert and found every gap in every jacket and every collar, and the cottonwoods along the highway median had gone yellow and brittle, and were dropping leaves in long, spiraling arcs across the road, like something was shedding them on purpose. Ronan had been staring at his coffee for 11 minutes. He knew it was 11 minutes because the clock on the wall above the pie case had a second hand that stuttered rather than swept, and he'd been tracking it since he sat down. Not because time mattered this morning, but because watching the stutter of that second hand was easier than thinking about the date. In 4 days, it would be October 27th. He already felt it moving through him the way cold moves through stone, slow, total, and indifferent to any resistance. October 27th was the day his daughter Emma had stopped breathing. She'd been 4 years old. Ronan had been 31. In the years between then and now, he had learned to armor everything, learned to wall grief behind ritual and road miles, and the structured violence of running a motorcycle club through a landscape that rewarded neither softness nor sentiment. He was good at it. He had become, over those 8 years, genuinely difficult to reach. The men who rode with him knew this and respected it. Civilians sensed it and kept their distance. Even the people who feared him gave him a kind of wide berth that was almost courteous, a recognition that whatever lived behind those dark eyes had already survived something most people couldn't imagine and had come out the other side wearing it like iron. So when the door opened and the small figure walked in, he didn't look up immediately. The bell above the door had a particular tone. Not quite a chime, more a clunk, the bell equivalent of May's diner itself. And Ronan registered it the way he registered all sounds, as information filed and forgotten. Another customer, cold air coming in, door swinging shut. He returned his attention to the coffee. Then Deb said, from somewhere behind the counter, "Oh, sweetheart." That made him look up. The girl was small, even for what he'd eventually learn was her age of 7. She was wearing a coat that had been good quality once, probably 2 sizes ago, its sleeves stopping 2 inches above her wrists, exposing skin that was reddened from the cold. Her jeans had a hole in the left knee that had been stitched back together and come undone again. Her hair was brown and pulled into a ponytail that had been done carefully. Too carefully for this morning, as if it had been done yesterday or the day before, and was now simply holding on. On her back she wore a pink backpack covered in faded cartoon stars, the kind of bag sold at chain pharmacies alongside birthday cards and travel-sized shampoo, the kind that costs $8 and is clearly sized for a child's one-day field trip. She was not carrying anything else. She walked to the counter with the particular walk of a child who has learned that hesitation costs more than forward motion. Not confident, exactly. Something harder than confidence, a kind of purposeful calm that should not have been present in a 7-year-old's body at 7:45 on a Thursday morning. She set one hand on the counter stool and climbed up without help. Deb had come around from behind the coffee machines and was already crouching slightly, getting to the girl's eye level, the way adults do when they're trying to be trustworthy in a hurry. "Are you okay, honey? Where's your mom?" The girl looked at Deb with brown eyes that were completely dry and said, "I don't know. She was gone when I woke up. I walked here because I remembered it from when we stopped before." Deb straightened up very slightly. Something moved across her face that she controlled quickly. "How far did you walk?" "From the Blue Crest Motel, the one by the overpass." Ronan knew the Blue Crest. Everyone along this stretch knew the Blue Crest. It was 3 miles from Maze, and it rented by the week. And the people who stayed there long-term were people for whom the Blue Crest represented not a stop, but a destination. He'd done a job near there 2 years back, a thing he didn't think about in daylight. The distance from the Blue Crest to Maze along the highway shoulder, in 40-degree wind, in a coat 2 sizes too small, was not a small thing. "You walked 3 miles?" Deb said. "It wasn't that cold," the girl said. This was a lie, so obvious and so practiced that Ronan understood immediately she had told it many times. The cheerful dismissal of discomfort, the reflexive reduction of her own difficulty. He recognized it because he had been doing the same thing for 8 years, and he knew exactly what it cost. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Maisie. Maisie Rowan." "Okay, Maisie. Can I get you something warm? Hot chocolate?" A pause. Ronan watched the girl's face move through something. A calculation, or maybe something older than calculation. The ancient arithmetic of a child who has learned to consider whether accepting help comes with a cost. "Okay," Maisie said. "Thank you." Deb disappeared toward the machine. Maisie turned on her stool and looked around the diner. She looked at the Black Forge men at the far booth, 3 of them, Cutter and Bishop and a newer recruit named Trace. And they looked back at her with the blank, polite expressions of large men trying not to be alarming. She looked at the trucker at the counter to her right. She looked at the old couple near the window. Then she looked at Ronan. He had expected her to look away. Children usually did. His face wasn't kind in the conventional sense. The scar was part of it, but it was also the set of his jaw, the depth of whatever lived behind his eyes. The way a man looks after 8 years of deciding that other people's comfort around him is not his responsibility. Children either burst into tears or developed a sudden urgent interest in something across the room. Maisie Rowan looked at Ronan Voss and did not look away. She studied the scar. She studied his eyes. Her expression was not fearless. He would think about this later and get it right. It was something more specific than fearless. It was the expression of a child who has already encountered things that frightened her genuinely, things with real teeth, and has therefore developed an accurate gauge for what does and does not actually represent danger. She looked at him the way a person looks at a storm on the horizon and correctly calculates that it's moving away. She picked up her backpack from beside the stool, carried it across the diner, and set it on the table in front of him. Ronan looked at the backpack. He looked at her. "Everything I own is inside this bag," she said. Conversational, factual, the way someone mentions the weather. He didn't say anything. She climbed into the seat across from him without asking permission, the exact seat he used as a kind of exclusion zone, the empty space across the table that signaled to the world, "Do not sit here." And she put both hands flat on the table and looked at him directly. "You have a sad face," she said, "but not a mean one." The diner did not actually go quiet. The trucker was still eating. The old couple was still talking. The forge men at the far booth were still doing whatever they were doing with their phones and their eggs. Deb was behind the counter with the hot chocolate machine. The neon outside still buzzed. But something shifted. Something in the frequency of the room, some vibration that Ronan had spent 8 years maintaining. The invisible architecture of "do not approach, do not engage, do not make me feel anything," developed a hairline fracture somewhere in the vicinity of his sternum, and he felt it, and he did not know what to do with it. He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. "You walked 3 miles alone." "Yes." "In the cold?" "Yes." "To a diner you'd been to once before." I remembered the sign, the broken letters. She glanced toward the window, toward the buzzing red neon. "I thought if they kept a broken sign that long, they probably let people stay a while." He absorbed this. It was the most devastatingly practical piece of reasoning he'd heard in years. She'd chosen her refuge not by warmth or familiarity, but by evidence of low standards and high tolerance. The logic of a child who had learned that durability mattered more than comfort. "Where's your father?" he asked. Something moved across her face. Fast. Controlled. Gone. "I don't have one of those," she said. Deb arrived with the hot chocolate and set it in front of the empty space where Maisie had been sitting, then looked up and found the girl at Ronan's table. Her expression cycled rapidly. Surprise, concern, and then something that was almost relief, though she'd have been hard-pressed to explain exactly why. "I'll, bring that over," she said, and carried the mug to the table. Maisie wrapped both hands around it. The redness in her skin, Ronan noticed, went all the way up to her elbows. "How long were you outside?" "I left when it got light, so—" She considered. "Maybe 2 hours?" He put his hand flat on the table and said nothing, not because he had nothing to say, because the thing rising in his chest was made of the wrong material for words, and he needed a moment before it reached his face. Emma had loved hot chocolate, extra marshmallows. She'd hold the mug with both hands the same way. He pushed the thought down, flat, hard, the way you tamp down a charge before it detonates. "Has anyone called anyone?" he said, not to Maisie, loud enough for Deb. Deb was already reaching for the phone behind the counter. "Doing it now. We're going to call the sheriff's office, honey, okay? Just to make sure your mom is all right and someone knows where you are." Maisie did not look afraid of this. She nodded in the way someone nods when they've heard this particular sentence before and understand the sequence of events that follows it. The call. The wait. The people in lanyards with clipboards and the particular kind of professional warmth that is kind and temporary and leads to a car ride and a door and a room that will not be hers for long. "I know how this goes," she said quietly. To her hot chocolate, not to anyone in particular. Ronan heard it. He heard the weight of it. 7 years old and already equipped with the exhausted foreknowledge of a child who has been processed by systems of care and understood that being cared for and being safe were not the same category of thing. He looked out the window at his bike, at the cold sky, at the empty road. He thought, "Walk away, Voss. This is not yours." He'd thought the same thing 3 times in his life that mattered, and twice he'd been right, and once he'd been catastrophically wrong. He had the scar to prove which kind of wrong. Cutter came over 15 minutes later. Not because Ronan signaled him. Cutter had been watching the situation from the far booth with the quiet tactical attention he'd developed in Fallujah and never managed to put down, and he'd drawn his own conclusions. He was a big man, Cutter, 6'3", built like a door that had decided to start working out. His road name came from the ka bar he'd carried for 3 tours and the subsequent difficulty he'd had, in the years after, deciding what to do with his hands when he wasn't using them to prevent a problem. He'd been with Ronan since year 2 of the Forge, and there was a specific quality to his loyalty that transcended affection. It was the loyalty of a man who had seen Ronan do the right thing in circumstances where the wrong thing was easier and had decided to follow that. He slid into the booth beside Ronan, not across from him, left Maisie across the table with her hot chocolate. "Situation?" he said low. "Abandoned at the Blue Crest. Walked here. Mom's missing." Cutter looked at Maisie. Maisie looked back at Cutter. She did the same calculation she'd done with Ronan, the quick, honest assessment, and reached what appeared to be the same conclusion. Large, scarred, not dangerous in the way the word implied. "You like motorcycles?" Cutter said to her. "I've never been on one." "They're loud," he said, as if this was all that needed to be said about them. "I know, I could hear yours from outside." A half smile crossed Cutter's face. He looked at Ronan. Something passed between them that required no words, a compression of context and history that translated to, "This is a problem, and we are not walking away from it," which is a sentence neither of them would have said aloud because saying things aloud made them softer, and the world had not rewarded softness. The sheriff's deputy arrived 40 minutes later. His name was Harlow, young, 26 maybe, the particular brand of official neutrality that comes from not yet having had enough failures to know which rules were worth bending. He crouched in front of Maisie with the same deliberate eye-level posture as Deb, and he was kind. Ronan would give him that. He was genuinely kind. "Your mom's name is Claire Rowan?" "Yes." "And you last saw her last night?" "She was there when I fell asleep. When I woke up, her stuff was gone. Not all of it." Maisie's voice was level. "She left my stuff." The deputy's face did something small and almost invisible that Ronan recognized as the suppression of a very specific kind of horror, the kind that comes from understanding what it means that the mother had left deliberately, had taken her own belongings and left the child's. "Okay," Harlow said, keeping his voice steady. "You did the right thing coming here, Maisie. We're going to figure this out, okay? I'm going to need to make some calls. Child Protective Services is going to come." "I know," Maisie said. Harlow looked at her. I've done this before." She picked up her mug. "The hot chocolate is good here." Harlow stood. He looked at Deb. He looked at Ronan. His gaze lingered on Ronan in the reflexive way that young law enforcement officers look at men wearing black forge cuts, a combination of professional caution and the cultural inheritance of every cop show that had ever aired on cable television. Ronan had spent a long time being looked at this way. He met the deputy's eyes and kept his hands visible on the table and waited until the kid found whatever he was looking for and moved on. Harlow stepped outside to make his calls. Ronan looked at Maisie. She was drawing something on a napkin with a pen she'd pulled from her backpack. Small, focused, the pencil moving with the automatic concentration of a child who draws to make time pass, who draws the way other people breathe. "What are you drawing?" he asked. She turned the napkin. It was a house. A small one, square and simple with a door and 3 windows, and what might have been a tree or might have been a cloud beside it. And in front of the house, drawn with the naive accuracy of a child who had paid attention to the world, 2 motorcycles parked side by side. He looked at the drawing for a long time. "Do you live somewhere with motorcycles?" he asked. "No," she said, "but it seems like the kind of house that would be safe." He put his hands under the table so she wouldn't see what they were doing. CPS arrived 90 minutes after the deputy in the form of a woman named Sandra Pruitt, who was not unkind, who was in fact clearly competent and professional and doing her level best with a caseload that was, Ronan would later learn, 30% over capacity. She had the look of someone who had started this job 20 years ago believing in systems and had arrived at a complicated relationship with that belief. Not cynicism, exactly. Something more tired. She wore a lanyard with a photo ID and carried a tablet and spoke to Maisie in the cadences of someone who had done this hundreds of times and still, somehow, meant it. She took Ronan's name, wrote it down, looked at the cut on his jacket, the black forge patch, the president's rocker beneath it, and wrote something else. "You know this child?" she said. "No." "She came to you." "She sat down," he said. "I didn't move her." Sandra Pruitt looked at him for a moment. I'm not suggesting anything, she said. I'm noting context. Note it. She turned back to Maisie. The conversation that followed was practiced and gentle, and Ronan sat through all of it, not because anyone asked him to, but because he found he could not physically stand up and leave while a 7-year-old was being processed by a system, however well-intentioned, that had already processed her at least once before. He stayed because staying was the only thing he could do that wasn't walking away, and walking away was no longer available to him, though he couldn't have said exactly when it had stopped being available. Cutter had gone back to the far booth. Bishop was watching the door. Trace was doing something on his phone. None of them were paying obvious attention, and all of them were paying complete attention. At some point, Maisie looked over at Ronan, past Sandra Pruitt, and said, "Will you still be here?" Sandra Pruitt turned to see who she was speaking to. "Yes," Ronan said. He didn't think about it. The word came out of whatever had cracked open earlier, out of the fracture, clean and immediate, the way water comes out of stone once the break is there. Maisie nodded. She turned back to Sandra and answered the next question. Sandra pulled Ronan aside before she left with Maisie. Outside. Cold air. The bikes in the parking lot. The yellow cottonwood leaves skittering across the asphalt like something trying to escape. "She's going into emergency foster placement today," Sandra said. She kept her voice professional and low. "We have 2 households on the rotation in this county. They're good people." "Okay?" Sandra looked at him steadily. "She asked about you." "I know." "She asked if you'd visit." He said nothing. "I'm not authorized to—" Sandra stopped, rubbed her forehead with 2 fingers. Tried again. "She's been through placement before, about 18 months ago, when her mother first lost housing. That stay lasted 4 months, and then Ms. Rowan stabilized and Maisie went back. This time," she exhaled. "The circumstances suggest this isn't stabilization in progress. This is something more deliberate." He understood what she was saying. The mother had left on purpose, not fallen apart, left. "She's a good kid," Sandra said. It came out slightly ragged, as if it had worn through the professional coating. "She's really a good kid, and the system is what it is, and I wish it were different." "Is there anything that makes it different?" he said. Sandra looked at him, processing. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "What do I need to do to be on that rotation?" She was quiet for a long moment. The wind moved through the cottonwoods. Somewhere in the lot, one of the forge men laughed at something. Low, brief, familiar. "Mr. Voss," she said carefully. "The background check alone, I know. The licensing process is months. The home study, the psychological evaluation, I know. With your history, your profession, I know," he said for the 3rd time, flat. Not defensive, just, "I know, and I'm asking anyway." Sandra Pruitt looked at this man, 53 square inches of patch on his chest, hands that had clearly broken things, eyes that had clearly witnessed worse than that, and she looked at him for what felt like a long time. "I'll give you the number for the licensing office in Flagstaff," she said. "They open at 8. She typed it into his phone without being asked. Then she walked back inside to get Maisie. Ronan stood in the parking lot in the cold for a while. He stared at his bike. The sky had gone from pewter to the dull white of an old scar. Cutter came out behind him, stood beside him, did not speak. After a while, Ronan said, "She drew a picture of a house with motorcycles in front of it." "I saw," Cutter said. "She said it seemed safe." Cutter was quiet. "Emma?" Ronan started, stopped. His jaw worked. He tried again. "Emma used to say she could hear my bike coming home from 3 streets away." Cutter said nothing. He put one large hand on Ronan's shoulder and left it there. Inside the diner, through the window, Ronan watched Sandra Pruitt help Maisie put her pink backpack on. Watched Maisie adjust the straps with the practiced efficiency of a child who had done it alone so many times the motion was completely automatic. Watched her look back toward his table, toward the empty space where he'd been sitting, and do the thing children do when they are steeling themselves, that small private gathering of breath, that squaring of shoulders, that renegotiation with the world. She walked out with Sandra. She looked up and found him in the parking lot. She stopped. "You said you'd stay," she said. "I did. But now you're leaving." "I'm standing outside." She considered this distinction. "Oh," she said. Then, "Okay." Sandra guided her to the county vehicle, a gray sedan with a thin strip of logo along the door. Maisie climbed in. She twisted to look out the window as the car pulled out of the lot, and she watched him until the car turned onto the highway and the cottonwoods swallowed the road. Behind him, he heard boots on asphalt, multiple sets. The forge men, coming out without being called. Surrounding him in the loose, unhurried formation that wasn't a formation, the way they'd stood beside him at funerals and sentencings and hospital waiting rooms. "So," Bishop said. Just that. So. Ronan looked at the highway where the car had disappeared. He had $42,000 in the club account set aside for legitimate legal costs. He had a compound outside Ash Fork with 4 bedrooms and a full kitchen and a yard that backed onto National Forest. He had 19 men who would renovate anything he pointed at between one Saturday morning and the following Sunday night. He had enemies and a record and a psychological profile that he was fairly certain would make a licensing officer's eye twitch. He had 8 years of grief so well managed that he'd mistaken it for healing. He had a second-hand drawing of a house with 2 motorcycles in front of it, still on the table inside. He had every reason in the world to get on his bike and ride west until the feeling in his chest burned itself out. He went back inside and picked up the napkin with Maisie's drawing. He folded it, put it in his jacket pocket against his chest. He looked at Deb. She had both hands around a coffee mug and was watching him with an expression he couldn't immediately decode. "I need the number for that licensing office in Flagstaff," he said. "Sandra already gave it to you. I need you to have it too." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up a pen, tore a strip from an order pad, and wrote the number she didn't actually have because she'd heard Sandra give it to him and memorized it in case it mattered. She slid it across the counter. "The pie's not that bad," she said, "if you're planning to be here a while." Ronan looked at the strip of paper. He looked out the window at the road. "She said the house with motorcycles in front felt safe," he said. "Not to Deb, not to anyone." Deb said nothing. He put the number in his pocket beside the drawing. He called the licensing office at 8:02 the following morning. The woman who answered was named Patricia. She had the specific inflections of someone who fielded calls from people who were not going to complete the process and had developed a finely tuned ear for separating them from the ones who would. Ronan stated his name, stated what he wanted, stated that he was aware of the timelines and the requirements and the complexity of his particular situation. Patricia was quiet for 3 seconds. "Mr. Voss, I'm going to need to be up front with you about a few things." "Go ahead." The licensing process for foster care in Arizona involves a background check, fingerprinting, a home study conducted by a licensed evaluator, references, a mandated training course which runs approximately 30 hours, and a psychological evaluation. "I know. Given any prior..." "I've had 1 arrest, 2009, assault charge that was pled to disorderly conduct, no conviction on any subsequent charges. I can send you documentation." A pause. "You've looked into this already." "I called a lawyer yesterday afternoon." Another pause. Longer. "The home study evaluator will need to inspect your residence. The inspection is for safety compliance, but also for habitability for a child, I understand." "Mr. Voss." Her tone shifted slightly. Not warmer exactly, but more considered. "Why don't you come in Friday morning at 9, and we can walk through the complete documentation list in person?" He said he'd be there. He hung up and sat at his kitchen table in the Ash Fork compound in the early morning quiet, with the drawing on the table in front of him and cold coffee he'd forgotten to drink and the particular silence of a house that had not held a child's voice in 8 years. He looked at the 2 motorcycles drawn in brown ink on a white diner napkin. He thought about Emma. He let himself think about her for exactly 1 minute. The rule he'd made, early on, that 1 minute was enough to remember and not enough to drown. And then he folded the napkin, stood up, and went to find Cutter. He found him in the garage, where Cutter spent most mornings, working on a '68 Sportster that had been in pieces for approximately 2 years. The garage smelled the way it always smelled, oil and cold metal, and the faint ghost of cigarette smoke from a man who'd quit but hadn't entirely convinced his hands of it yet. "I have a meeting Friday," Ronan said. Cutter kept working. "Licensing office." "Yeah. You want company?" "No." Cutter set down the wrench, looked at him. "You want company?" Ronan said nothing for a moment, then, "The compound needs work." "Tell me what kind." "A room, the one off the back hallway. It needs—" He stopped. The word felt enormous in his mouth. "It needs to look like a place a child could live." Cutter picked the wrench back up. "I'll call Bishop." "Don't make a thing of it." "It won't be a thing." It would be a thing. Ronan knew it would be a thing. By nightfall, there would be 12 men in his compound with tools and paint and opinions about whether the window in the back room faced the right direction for morning light. And it would be a thing that nobody talked about as a thing, and that would somehow be the most important kind of thing. He went back to the kitchen. He looked at the drawing. He thought, "She said it seems like the kind of house that would be safe." He thought, "I've been living in it for 4 years, and I didn't know." Outside the compound, the desert spread in every direction, under a sky that was going from pale to darker, clouds building from the northwest, the smell of rain coming from a long way off. The Harleys sat in a row against the garage wall. The cottonwoods at the property edge were bare now, stripped by the night wind, their branches holding nothing. But somewhere in a county-approved emergency placement in Flagstaff, a 7-year-old girl with careful brown eyes and a pink backpack was waking up in an unfamiliar room. And whether she was drawing houses with motorcycles in front of them, Ronan didn't know. He intended to find out. Patricia at the licensing office had been professional. The home study evaluator who called 3 days later was a different thing entirely. Her name was Dr. Wendy Marsh, contracted through the county, mid-40s, the kind of precise courtesy that concealed a well-developed skepticism. She would be conducting the home study, she explained. The process involved multiple visits, structured interviews, a review of his living situation, and documentation of his current employment and income. "Your primary income source," she said. "The motorcycle club runs 3 legitimate businesses, a repair shop in Ash Fork, a roadside assistance operation, a parts distribution outfit that operates regionally. And the club itself is legal, flat, waiting." A pause. "Mr. Voss, I want to be honest with you. Applications from individuals with MC affiliations are reviewed carefully," he said. "I know, do your job. That's all I'm asking." She arrived on a Tuesday morning with a clipboard and a standard warmth that did not entirely conceal the assessment happening behind her eyes. She walked the compound. She noted the guns in the locked cabinet, which was what they were supposed to be, locked, separately from ammunition, per regulation. She noted the yard. She noted the room off the back hallway, which by now had been painted a neutral, warm gray by 12 men who had collectively owned exactly 0 children's rooms, and had therefore consulted a combination of YouTube tutorials and Cutter's ex-wife via speakerphone. Wendy Marsh stood in the doorway of that room for a long moment. The bed was new. The dresser was salvaged from a Goodwill in Flagstaff and refinished with more care than it had ever received in its previous life. The window faced east, because Bishop had checked, and it faced east and got morning light. There was a small bookshelf that held 3 books and a lot of empty space, which was somehow better than overloading it. The floor had a rug, a round one, colors that weren't aggressive, that Trace had bought at a craft fair while pretending he was there for entirely different reasons. "Who did this room?" Marsh said. "Club members." "They do this kind of thing regularly?" "They do whatever needs doing." She wrote something on her clipboard. Her face was giving away less than he would have liked. Matt. The supervised visit was approved 6 days later. A single 2-hour window, county facility in Flagstaff, a room with a table and chairs, and a social worker on the other side of a window. He drove up alone. Parked in a lot that felt aggressively normal, other parents' cars, a van with a handicap placard, a silver sedan. He sat in his truck for a minute, not because he was uncertain, because the thing in his chest had been building since that Thursday morning in the diner, and he was trying to manage its size before he walked into that room. He went in. Maisie was already there, sitting at the table with a coloring book she wasn't coloring. When she saw him come through the door, she went very still for 1 second. The stillness of a child recalibrating a belief she'd been afraid to hold. And then she exhaled, and the stillness resolved into something much simpler. "You came," she said. "I said I would." "People say things." "I know," he said. "I came anyway." He sat across from her. She looked different. The same face, the same eyes. But the coat had been replaced with something that fit, and someone had rebraided her hair, and she seemed both more settled and more fragile, the way a bruise looks worse on the second day than the first. "How's the placement?" he said. "They're nice?" She said it the way people say fine when they mean adequate and are too exhausted to elaborate. "Do you have your own room?" "Yes." "Bookshelf?" Something shifted in her eyes. "Why?" "Just asking." She looked at him for a moment. "You're trying to find out if I like to read." "Are you?" A pause. A small, reluctant thing that was almost a smile. "I like stories," she said. "Not boring ones." "What makes them boring?" "When nothing happens to anybody." He absorbed this. "Fair." She picked up a crayon, brown, and made a mark in the coloring book without looking at it. "Why are you doing this?" she said. Not accusatory, genuine. He thought about the answer. Several versions of it existed. He chose the honest one. "Because you sat down across from me like you weren't afraid," he said. "And I wanted to know why." She thought about this. "I wasn't afraid because you looked sad," she said. "Sad people aren't scary. They're just carrying something heavy." 8 years of building walls, of maintaining distance, of assuring himself and everyone around him that he was operational and contained and fine. 8 years. And a 7-year-old with a brown crayon had just walked straight through all of it and said, "You're just carrying something heavy," like it was the simplest and most obvious thing in the world, which, he realized, sitting in that county facility room with the fluorescent light humming above them, it was. "Yeah," he said. His voice came out slightly wrong. He adjusted. "Yeah, something like that." She went back to her coloring book. He stayed for the full 2 hours. When the social worker indicated time was up, Maisie started putting her crayons away. One by one, with the methodical care of a child who does not assume anything will be there when she comes back for it. She put them in a small Ziploc bag she'd clearly brought for exactly this purpose. She picked up the pink backpack from the floor beside her chair. She looked at him. "Will you come back?" she said. "Next Wednesday," he said. "Same time." She nodded. She adjusted the backpack straps. At the door, she turned back one more time, the way she had in the diner parking lot, and looked at him with those steady brown eyes that had never once in their short acquaintance looked at him with anything less than full attention. "Mr. Voss," she said. "Ronan." "Ronan." She tried it, nodded. "I drew another house last night. I put more motorcycles in front this time." She walked out through the door before he could say anything. He sat in the empty room for a moment, alone under the fluorescent light, with the ghost of her crayon marks on the coloring book page. Then he pulled out his phone and called Cutter. "I need a lawyer," he said. "A good one. Family law." "How good?" "The kind that knows how to argue that a biker president is a suitable guardian for a 7-year-old girl." Cutter was quiet for exactly 1 second. "I know a guy," he said. Outside the county facility, the afternoon sky had gone a deep cold blue, and the mountains on the horizon were already holding the first dusting of snow. Ronan walked to his truck. He sat behind the wheel. He took the folded diner napkin from his jacket pocket and looked at the small, careful drawing. The house, the tree or cloud, the 2 motorcycles. He thought, "I don't know how this ends." He thought, "I know I'm not stopping." He started the truck. But before he pulled out of the lot, his phone buzzed. Unknown number, Arizona area code. He answered. The voice on the other end was male, low, deliberate. The kind of voice calibrated to communicate consequence. "Mr. Voss, I hear you're trying to become a foster parent." The line crackled once with something that was not static. "I'd strongly recommend you reconsider." The call ended. Ronan sat in the parking lot of the county facility in the last of the afternoon light. Phone in his hand, the mountains ahead of him going slowly white. Someone knew what he was doing. Someone was already trying to stop it. And whoever they were, they'd called him within 3 hours of his first supervised visit, which meant they had access to county records, or someone inside the system, or both. He looked at the napkin in his hand. He looked at the mountains. He called Cutter back. "We have a problem," he said. Cutter picked up on the second ring. "We have a problem," Ronan said. A pause. The particular quality of Cutter's silences had always been informative. This one was the kind that meant he was already standing up, already moving, already doing the mental inventory of what was in reach and what would need to be retrieved. "Talk. Someone called me. Unknown number. Knew I was trying to foster Maisie. Told me to reconsider." "Threatening?" "Implied." "Time frame?" 3 hours since the visit, which means they have access to county records or someone inside. Another pause. Shorter. "You still in the Flagstaff lot?" "Yeah." "Don't move. I'm calling Bishop. We'll be there in 40. "I don't need ush." "Don't move," Cutter said, and ended the call. Ronan sat with the phone in his hand and the mountains going darker ahead of him, and the napkin drawing on the seat beside him, and whatever had cracked open in his chest 3 days ago, still open, still refusing to close. He thought about the voice. Male. 40s, maybe older. The deliberate pace of it. Not rushed, not angry. The register of someone accustomed to making statements rather than arguments. Someone who expected results without needing to specify consequences. He'd heard voices like that before. He knew what they meant. They meant money or power or both. And they meant that whoever was making the call believed the person on the receiving end could be persuaded by implication alone. They'd miscalculated. He started the truck. He did not leave the lot, but he pulled forward into a position facing the exit because old habits were the kind of thing that kept you alive. And he'd learned a long time ago that facing the door was not paranoia, it was arithmetic. He waited. Chubbed. Bishop arrived in 36 minutes, which meant he'd been doing over 90 on the I-17 cutoff, which was exactly the kind of information Ronan chose not to verify. He came in a black pickup, Cutter in the passenger seat, and a third man in the back whom Ronan identified as Garrett, 48, former Army Signal Corps, now the Forge's primary person for anything involving electronics, communications, or the intersection of both. Garrett was the one who mattered here. They pulled in beside Ronan's truck. The three men got out into the cold and gathered at the rear of the vehicles in a configuration that looked to anyone watching like friends meeting in a parking lot, which it was, merely with a specific operational texture. Ronan gave them the call, verbatim, the timing, the content, the register. Garrett was already on his phone before Ronan finished. "Unknown number," he said, not a question. "Burner or spoofed?" "Didn't feel like a burner, too clean, probably routed." "Can you give me the number it showed?" Ronan pulled up the call log. Garrett photographed it. His thumbs moved across his screen with the practiced speed of a man who had spent 3 years in signal intelligence before the Army decided his particular methods were more asset than liability, and 3 more years after deciding the reverse. "Give me a day," Garrett said. "You'll have it in 6 hours, Cutter said. Not a request. Garrett looked at him. 6 hours, he agreed. Bishop had said nothing through all of this. Bishop rarely said anything through anything, which was part of what made him valuable. He was a compact man, 5'10", built dense, with a face that registered information without transmitting reaction, a skill developed across 11 years as a street-level detective in Phoenix before something happened in 2014 that he'd left the department over and never discussed. He came to the Forge 2 years after that, referred by someone no longer in the club, and had become over the subsequent years the person Ronan trusted most for the reading of situations where the variables were human. Bishop was looking at the county facility building. "They knew about the visit specifically," he said. "Yes. Not just that you'd applied. The visit. Today." "That's correct. Who knew about today's visit besides you?" "Patricia at the licensing office, the social worker assigned to Maisie, Sandra Pruitt, who was already aware I was pursuing this, the foster placement household, potentially the county supervisor." Bishop nodded slowly. not a wide network. No. So it's either someone inside the county system with access to scheduling, or someone with a relationship to one of those specific people. Or someone watching me directly and drawing their own conclusions. Possible, Bishop said. Less efficient. Whoever this is prefers efficiency. He turned from the building and looked at Ronan. This is connected to Maisie's mother. It was not a question. Ronan had been working toward the same conclusion for 36 minutes. Claire Rowan didn't just wander off, Ronan said. No, Bishop said. She didn't. They rode back to Ash Fork in convoy, which was not planned but was also not surprising. This was how the Forge operated when a situation crossed from personal to collective, which this had become the moment an unknown party decided to call the president's personal cell. The compound was lit against the November dark when they arrived, the long metal building that served as the garage throwing yellow light from its open door, Trace's bike parked at an angle outside that indicated a hastily concluded ride. Inside, 4 more men were present. Trace, a veteran named Dutch who handled most of the club's legitimate logistics, a mechanic they called Riggs, who was in his 60s and had been with the Forge since before Ronan took the gavel, and a new man, Solano, 29, former Border Patrol, still finding his register. They gathered in the main room, not the garage, not the formal meeting space, but the kitchen-adjacent common room that smelled of motor oil and old coffee, and the particular accumulated human warmth of men who ate and argued and fell asleep in front of televisions together. The overhead light was bad. Nobody fixed it. The table had 8 chairs, and they filled them. Ronan told the room what he'd told the parking lot. The room processed this in the characteristic Forge way, individual men cycling through their own responses without performing them, until the responses resolved into something collective. Trace was the first to speak, which meant he'd reached his conclusion faster than the others, which was usually a sign the conclusion needed examining. We can find out who made that call and make sure they don't make another one, Trace said. No, Ronan said. Ronan, no. The whole reason I'm doing this is because the county has to look at me and decide I'm a man who can raise a child. You touch whoever made that call and I hand them the decision on a plate. Trace leaned back, jaw tight. He was young enough that suppressing the direct solution still required visible effort. Dutch said, so we find out who it is and we don't touch them. We find out who it is, Ronan agreed, and we understand the whole picture before we decide what to do about it. Garrett was already working at the end of the table with a laptop and a secondary phone, running whatever traces he ran through channels Ronan had made a deliberate policy of not fully understanding. There was a line between operational awareness and complicity, and Ronan had always known where it was and had always known that the club's functioning depended on his maintaining it. Claire Rowan, Ronan said to Bishop now, what do we know? What we can get publicly in the next few hours, Bishop said, more with time. Start with what we can get. Bishop pulled out his own phone. He'd been doing preliminary searches since the parking lot. Claire Rowan, 31, Arizona ID. Last known address the Blue Crest, but prior to that, a Flagstaff address that's associated with a property owned by a company called Meridian Residential Holdings, LLC. He looked up. Meridian has 11 properties in Coconino County, all low-income residential, all currently under an application for redevelopment zoning variance. The room was quiet. Tenant displacement, Dutch said. That's one reading, Bishop said. And Claire Rowan's name appears in a group of 17 tenants who filed a formal objection to the variance application with the county planning board 8 months ago. Then she disappeared, Ronan said. Then she disappeared, Bishop confirmed. Riggs, who had been silent in the way that very old men are silent when they're computing something against a longer timeline than everyone else in the room, said, "What's Meridian worth?" "I'm looking," Bishop said. "The variance," Riggs said. "If it passes, what does that land become?" "Mixed commercial residential at current Flagstaff market rates," Bishop read from his screen. 11 properties at an average lot size of... He did the arithmetic. Conservative estimate, the variance approval makes those holdings worth approximately 6 times their current assessed value. Riggs nodded slowly. and the only thing standing between them and that variance is 17 tenants with the organizational capacity to formally object. Was standing, Dutch said. Apparently. The room absorbed this. The overhead light buzzed. Outside, the wind had picked up, and somewhere a loose panel on the garage exterior was knocking in a slow, irregular rhythm that nobody moved to fix. Ronan thought about a woman leaving a motel room in the dark while her daughter slept, taking her own things, leaving the child's. He thought about the precision of that action, not the panic of flight, but the terrible deliberateness of someone who had been given a choice and taken the version of it that preserved the child. He thought about what kind of threat produces that particular calculation in a mother. Maisie's not just abandoned, he said. Maisie's leverage. The room went very still. Someone made Claire Rowan disappear, Ronan continued, in a way that looked voluntary, which means they needed her to leave on her own, which means whatever they had on her was enough to move her, but not enough to guarantee she'd stay moved. Unless... He stopped. Unless the child's placement created a situation that made return too complicated, Bishop finished. A mother fighting her way back through the child welfare system, Dutch said. That's months. Lawyers, assessments, a paper trail that gives someone time to finalize whatever they're finalizing. And nobody's looking for Claire Rowan, Ronan said, because she left voluntarily. Garrett looked up from his laptop. He had the expression of a man who'd found something he wasn't entirely comfortable with. The routed number, he said. I can't trace the origin yet, but the routing service is associated with a firm in Scottsdale. Corporate Communications Infrastructure. He paused. The firm has 2 listed clients in northern Arizona. One is a pharmaceutical logistics company. The other is Meridian Residential Holdings, LLC. The silence this time had a different quality. Trace said low. So we touched them. No, Ronan said. Ronan, they made a phone call. That's all we have. He looked at Trace steadily. I know what you want to do and I understand why. But I'm trying to bring a child into a home through the legal system. The moment we cross a line, we hand them a weapon. And if they cross one first, then we'll have something to work with, Bishop said quietly. Until then, we document, we watch, we wait. Trace pushed back from the table and went to stand by the window. He was 26 years old and had been in the forge for 14 months, recruited from a situation in Tucson that Ronan had resolved in a way that resulted in Trace following him back to Ashfork and not leaving. He had the specific restlessness of a young man who had learned to solve problems physically before he'd learned to think through them, and who was now in the company of older men who had learned, at significant personal cost, the difference between solving a problem and creating a new one. He was a good man. He needed time and repetition to trust the longer calculation. You're protecting the process, Trace said from the window. Not accusatory, working it out. I'm protecting the outcome, Ronan said. The process is how we get there. Down. He was back in Flagstaff by Thursday morning. The licensing office. Patricia's desk. The documentation that was multiplying with the particular fertility of bureaucratic paperwork, every form that was completed producing 2 additional forms, every cleared requirement revealing 3 more requirements beneath it. Patricia was professional. She was also, Ronan had come to understand, a person of genuine rigor. She applied the same scrutiny to his application that she applied to every application, which meant she found the same things every evaluator found when they looked at him carefully, and she noted them, and she asked about them, and she gave him the opportunity to respond, and she wrote down what he said. The 2009 charge, she said, for the 3rd time across their various meetings, because it was her job to approach it from multiple angles until she was satisfied she'd heard the complete version. Bar fight. A man was threatening a woman at the bar. I intervened. The woman? She did not press charges. She gave a statement to that effect. The man required 2 stitches. He declined to press charges as well. Patricia looked at her documentation. It says here he declined to press charges because his blood alcohol content was 3 times the legal limit, and he'd already admitted to his arresting officer that he'd swung first. Yes. And yet the responding officer still arrested you. The responding officer saw a man with a black forge patch at the scene of a physical altercation, Ronan said. He made a judgment call. Patricia closed the folder, looked at him. Mr. Voss, I've been doing this work for 19 years. I've processed applications from people who looked exactly the way society expects a parent to look, and I've watched those children end up in emergency placements within 6 months. And I've processed applications from people who looked nothing like the template and watched them become genuinely transformative caregivers. She folded her hands. The psychological evaluation is next week. The evaluator is Dr. Renata Solis. She's thorough. I know. She'll ask about your daughter. The word hit him the same way it always hit him, like a door opening onto a room that was very cold. He kept his face neutral. I know. You don't have to, Patricia started. I'll answer whatever she asks, he said. That's not the variable. Patricia studied him. What is the variable? He thought about the phone call in the parking lot, about Meridian Holdings, about Claire Rowan leaving a motel room in the dark with deliberate, terrible care. There are people who don't want this to go forward, he said. Patricia's expression shifted. Not dramatically, but the particular shift of a person whose professional alertness has been activated. Are you suggesting interference with a county process? I'm suggesting you watch your documentation for anything that looks irregular. She held his gaze. Is there something specific I should know about? Not yet, he said. If there is, I'll bring it to you. He left the licensing office in the mid-morning cold, collar up against the wind coming down off the San Francisco peaks, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The street was ordinary. A coffee shop, a tax office, a woman walking a dog the size of a suitcase. The everyday normalcy of a city that had no idea what was running underneath it. His phone buzzed. Bishop, Claire Rowan. Found something. Call when you can. He called. Talk to me. I went physical, Bishop said. Asked around the Blue Crest. The manager remembers Claire. He also remembers a black SUV that was parked outside her unit 3 times in the week before she left. Description. Dark-tinted, Arizona plates. No details on the plates, but he said it felt like, his words, official, but not cop. Private security. That's my read. Also. Bishop paused. He said Claire had a visitor the night before she left. A man, 40-something, suit, drove the SUV, stayed about 20 minutes. Claire was quiet after he left. Didn't come to the office, didn't take calls, just another pause. He said the next morning she was gone and the kid was still there. Ronan stood on the sidewalk with the phone against his ear and the wind in his face. Did she do anything before she left? He said. Anything she said to anyone? She left a note. The manager had it. She'd slid it under his door. Bishop's voice was careful now, the way it got when information mattered in more than one direction. She said, take care of my daughter if she's still there in the morning. Her name is Maisie. She's good. Please make sure someone good finds her. The sidewalk felt slightly different under his boots than it had 30 seconds ago. She hadn't abandoned Maisie. She'd placed her. The best way she could, with the only assets she had, a note under a door and the hope that morning would bring something better than what the previous night had offered. She knew about me, Ronan said. Someone told her I came to the diner on Thursdays. Or she remembered your bikes from a previous visit and made a calculation. Either way, she directed Maisie toward the diner on purpose. That's what it looks like, Bishop said. Ronan thought about a 7-year-old walking 3 miles in a 40-degree wind toward a broken neon sign, carrying everything she owned because her mother had calculated that a diner full of bikers was safer than whatever had walked through her motel room door the night before. He thought about what level of fear produces that calculation in a mother. Find her, he said. Working on it. Bishop, he stopped. When you find her. She comes back voluntarily, or she doesn't come back. You understand what I'm saying. I know what I'm doing, Ronan. He ended the call and stood for another moment on the sidewalk. A couple passed him without looking up. A city bus groaned around the corner. The dog walker came back in the opposite direction, the suitcase dog straining against its leash toward something invisible. Everything normal. Everything ordinary. Underneath it, something moving that he couldn't quite see the shape of yet. The psychological evaluation with Dr. Renata Solis happened on a Friday morning in a clean, carefully neutral office in a medical building off Route 89. Solis was 50, compact, with reading glasses she took on and off in a rhythm that Ronan eventually understood was a thinking habit rather than a vision issue. She had a way of asking questions that left a great deal of space around the question, space in which the person being asked could arrange their answer before committing to it, or refuse the arrangement entirely. She asked about his history with violence. He told her about the bar fight, about the 3 years before founding the Forge, when he'd done contract security work that occasionally required physical resolution, about the fact that he had not initiated violence in 11 years and did not intend to. She asked about his history with authority. He said he had a complicated relationship with institutional systems and a straightforward relationship with the law. She asked about Emma. The room got cold. He told her. He had prepared to tell her, had rehearsed the facts in the truck on the drive over, but facts and the telling of them were different things, and the telling still cost him in the way it always cost him. A physical sensation, pressure in the chest, the specific effort of keeping his hands still. Emma had been 4. An accident. A backyard pool. A gate left unlatched. The 30-second window between Ronan's last visual check and the moment he heard the silence that was wrong. He'd pulled her out, CPR until the ambulance. She had not survived. The gate had been left unlatched by him. Dr. Solis did not say anything for a moment after he finished. Then she said, "Do you believe that was your fault?" "Yes," he said. "Do you still believe it now?" "Yes." He met her eyes. "The answer is yes, and it will always be yes. And the question is whether I've learned to carry it instead of being buried by it." "And have you?" He thought about a folded napkin in his jacket pocket, about a girl with brown crayon marks on a coloring book, about a mother who had walked into a cold morning trusting a biker's diner with the most important thing she owned. "I'm here," he said. "That's my answer." Solis wrote something. She looked at what she'd written. She looked at him. "Mr. Voss, in your view, why does a child in state care need someone like you specifically?" "She doesn't need someone like me specifically," he said. "She needs someone who won't leave. I'm the person who showed up and didn't leave. If someone better shows up and doesn't leave, I'll be the first to step aside." He paused. "But I don't think that's the direction this is going." She looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said quietly. "I don't think it is either." The first sign that the application was being interfered with arrived on a Tuesday, 9 days after the parking lot call. Patricia called him at 7 in the morning, which was itself a signal because Patricia operated on professional timelines, and professional timelines did not include 7 a.m. calls. "Mr. Voss, I need to inform you that a formal objection has been filed with this office regarding your application." He set down his coffee. "By who?" "The objection is filed under a provision that allows community members to raise concerns about pending foster care applications. The filing party is listed as," the brief pause of someone choosing how to deliver information, "Meridian Residential Holdings, LLC." He said nothing. "I want to be clear," Patricia said, "that this does not halt your application. Formal objections are reviewed and adjudicated through a separate process. However, I am required to notify you, and I am also required to tell you that the objection contains—" another pause. "It contains documentation." "What kind of documentation?" "Photographs of your compound, interior and exterior, of the individuals who frequent it, of—" She stopped. "Mr. Voss, there's a photograph of you at a location in 2018 that I need to ask you about." 2018. He knew the exact location they'd have a photograph of. There was only one from 2018 that could matter. "The warehouse in Williams," he said. Silence. "How did they get that?" he said. Not a question. A thing he was saying out loud to hear how it sounded. "I don't know," Patricia said, "but it's in the objection, and it's going to be reviewed." The warehouse in Williams, 2018. A situation involving a man who had been trafficking women across the state line, and a tip that had come to the Forge because the women's families had nowhere else to take it. What had happened in that warehouse was not something Ronan had ever been charged with, had never been officially connected to, and had resulted in 6 women going home and 1 man being unable to work again. It had been the right thing. It had been the wrong way to do the right thing. And someone with resources and access and a relationship to whatever had moved Claire Rowan out of a motel room in the dark, had a photograph from that warehouse in 2018 and had put it in a legal filing with the county child welfare system. "Patricia," he said, "Mr. Voss. Did you watch the documentation for irregularities the way I asked?" A long pause. "Yes." "What did you find?" The objection was filed by a Scottsdale law firm. The law firm's client record for Meridian Holdings shows a retainer that began. She took a breath. The retainer began on the same day Maisie Rowan entered county placement. The same day. They'd been moving before he'd even made his first call to the licensing office, before he'd known their name, before he'd understood what was underneath any of this. They'd started building the case against him the moment Maisie entered the system, which meant they'd known Ronan was going to try, which meant someone had told them, which meant there was a source inside the county, inside the specific network of people who knew about Maisie's placement, who was not just passively accessible to Meridian's people, but actively feeding them. "Don't file anything," he said. "Don't respond to the objection yet. Give me 48 hours. "Mr. Voss, I have procedural—" 48 hours, he said. "Please." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "My review of the objection takes as long as it takes," she said carefully. "I would estimate it takes approximately 48 hours. He thanked her and ended the call. He sat in the Ash Fork kitchen with the cold morning light coming through the east window. The same window that faced the room down the hall, the room with the bookshelf and the rug and 3 books and a lot of empty space. And he understood that the thing he was in had dimensions he had not yet fully mapped. He called Bishop. "The Williams photograph," he said. "Someone has it." Bishop was silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then, "How?" "I don't know, but it's in a legal filing against my foster application, filed by Meridian's lawyers." "Ronan," Bishop's voice was even in a way that required effort. "If that photograph surfaces, I know what it means. It means the application dies. It means potential reopening of—" "I know," Ronan said. "I know what it means." What it meant was simple and total. It meant the room down the hall would stay empty. It meant Maisie Rowan would move through the foster placement rotation with her pink backpack and her careful braided hair and her drawings of houses with motorcycles in front of them, and Ronan would be unable to reach her. And whoever had sent a man in a suit to a motel room to move a young mother out into the dark would have completed their work cleanly. "Garrett," Ronan said, "tell him I need the source inside the county, not the Meridian contact. The person feeding them from inside. That's the thread. He's already looking. Tell him to look faster." He ended the call and went to the window and looked at the desert spreading away from the compound in all directions under the hard winter light. His hands were still. His face was still. Everything he was feeling was entirely contained behind the architecture he'd spent 8 years building. But in the room down the hall, the morning light was coming through the east-facing window and falling across a rug that a 26-year-old man had bought at a craft fair while pretending he was there for other reasons, and it fell on an empty floor, and the emptiness had a specific weight he could feel from 20 feet away. He heard boots behind him, turned. Cutter, standing in the kitchen doorway. He'd been there for a while, Ronan realized, had come in silently in the way Cutter sometimes moved that was completely inconsistent with his size, but entirely consistent with his history. He had a coffee in each hand. He set one on the counter beside Ronan. "I heard the call," Cutter said. "I know." "The Williams thing. I know." Cutter looked at him. The morning light was in his face, and it showed everything the man was carrying. The Fallujah weight, the 3 marriages that hadn't made it, the son he hadn't seen in 8 years in a different way than Ronan hadn't seen Emma in 8 years, but the same fundamental absence, the same morning light accounting of what was gone. "We didn't do anything wrong in Williams," Cutter said. "We didn't do anything legal in Williams," Ronan said. "That's a different statement." Cutter was quiet. "I'm not apologizing for Williams," Ronan said. "I'd do it again, but I'd have found a way to do it that didn't leave a photograph." "You didn't know there was a photograph?" "No," he said. "I didn't." He picked up the coffee. It was hot and strong, and tasted exactly like the coffee he'd drunk every Thursday morning at May's Diner for 4 years. The diner where a 7-year-old girl had sat down across from him with her entire life on her back and said, "You have a sad face, but not a mean one," and cracked the door open on everything he'd sealed away. He thought, "I started this. I have to see it through." He thought, "And someone is about to make it very difficult." He thought, "Good." His phone buzzed. Garrett. He answered. "I found the source," Garrett said. "The person inside the county feeding them. You're not going to like it." "Tell me." "It's not someone in the licensing office. It's not CPS." A pause. "It's the social worker assigned to Maisie." The words landed with the specific weight of a thing that reorients everything. The angle of every previous scene, every exchange, every careful professional courtesy. "Sandra Pruitt," Ronan said. "No," Garrett said. "Sandra's clean. The assigned caseworker changed 12 days ago. Administrative reshuffle, standard paperwork, nothing unusual looking. The new assigned worker is a man named Dale Hobbs. He's been with the county for 6 years, and 11 days ago he opened a new bank account containing—" "Don't tell me the number," Ronan said. A pause. "Why?" "Because if you tell me the number, I'll do something about it tonight, and I can't afford to do something about it tonight." The silence on the line was the kind that meant Garrett understood and agreed, and was grateful for the instruction. "Hobbs has access to all of Maisie's case documentation," Garrett said. "Placement location, visitation schedule, your application timeline, everything. Which means Meridian knows where Maisie is." "Yes." Ronan set his coffee down on the counter. He looked at his hands. They were completely still. "Pull Bishop off the Claire Rowan search," he said. "Put him on Maisie's placement location. I need eyes on that household starting tonight." "Done," Garrett said. "But Ronan." "Yeah. If Meridian moves on the child—" "They won't," Ronan said. "She's not useful to them in danger. She's useful to them as leverage." "And if their calculation changes?" He picked up his coffee again. He looked out the window at the desert. "Then we change ours," he said. And his voice was the same voice that had said, "I won't promise perfection," and meant it, and said, "I'll stay," and meant it, and had spent 8 years learning the difference between a promise made from grief and a promise made from the part of himself that still believed in things. He ended the call. He went to the room down the hall. He stood in the doorway and looked at the east-facing window and the morning light on the empty floor and the 3 books on the bookshelf and the rug and the silence. He said nothing. He closed his eyes. He had walked into this believing the obstacles were bureaucratic. Background checks and home studies and psychological evaluations and the prejudice of a system trained to see a patch on a jacket and make a prior-held conclusion. He had been wrong. The obstacles were not bureaucratic. The obstacles were organized, funded, legally sophisticated, and already embedded in the system designed to protect the child he was trying to reach. And they had a photograph from a warehouse in Williams in 2018 that could end everything. He opened his eyes. He looked at the room. He had 1 move left before the application process became untenable, before the photograph created a situation that no documentation and no lawyer could navigate. He had to surface Claire Rowan, and he had to do it before Meridian's lawyers turned the photograph into a formal obstruction, and he had to do both of those things without crossing a line that would hand his enemies a weapon. He thought about what Sandra had said in the parking lot outside May's. "She's a good kid. She's really a good kid, and the system is what it is." He thought about a note slid under a motel manager's door in the dark. "Please make sure someone good finds her." He walked back to the kitchen. He picked up his phone. He called Cutter. "I need the whole club," he said. "Full table. Tonight." Cutter said, "Done." Then, "Ronan." "Yeah." "Whatever you're about to do?" Cutter stopped. Started again. "We're with you. All of us. That's not in question." Ronan looked at the east window. The light had shifted. Fuller now, mid-morning. The desert showing its colors properly. The red rock and the pale sage and the wide, cold sky. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm calling." He ended the call. He stood in the kitchen and he thought about walking away. Gave it its full and proper consideration. the way you owe it to yourself to consider the path that doesn't cost everything before you choose the one that does. He thought about getting on his bike and riding west until the desert ran out. He thought about the walls he'd built and how solid they'd been and how much they'd cost him, and whether they'd been worth it, and whether the alternative was worth what it was going to take. He thought about brown crayon marks on a coloring book page. He thought about a backpack that carried everything a person owned. He thought about a house with motorcycles in front of it that felt safe. He picked up his jacket from the chair. He put it on. He felt the folded napkin in the inside pocket, still there, still carrying its careful drawing. He walked to the door. Outside, the desert was bright and cold and enormous, and in every direction the road led somewhere. And on the road his bike was waiting, and somewhere beyond the road and the desert and the ordinary machinery of a city going about its business, a 7-year-old girl was waking up in a room that wasn't hers, in a house that wasn't home, waiting for Wednesday and the visit that someone with money and lawyers and a photograph from 2018 had just decided they were going to take from her. He swung his leg over the bike. He started the engine. The Harley came alive under him with a sound like the settling of a decision, low and constant and not asking any further questions, and he sat there for one moment in the compound lot, with the engine running and the cold air and the bare cottonwoods at the property edge, and he let himself feel the full weight of what he was committed to. Then he pulled out onto the road. Behind him, without being called, 3 more engines turned over, and then 3 more. By the time he hit the highway, he didn't look back to count because he didn't need to. He already knew they were there. The full table met at 10 that night. Not in the formal meeting room, the church, as some clubs called it, though the Forge never used that word, but in the garage because the garage was where the Forge had always convened when the thing on the table was real. The overhead fluorescents were too bright, and one kept stuttering, and the smell was oil and cold concrete and the ghost of welding smoke, and nobody had swept recently enough, and all of that was exactly right. You didn't think clearly in comfortable rooms. You thought clearly in rooms that told the truth about what you were. 19 men. Every full-patch member within range, plus Garrett, who wasn't patched but was present because his information was the reason they were here. Ronan stood at the workbench. He didn't sit. He laid out what they had. Meridian, the variance, Claire Rowan, the motel note, Dale Hobbs, and the new bank account, the Williams photograph in a legal filing, the Scottsdale law firm with a retainer that started the day Maisie entered county placement. The room listened the way the Forge always listened. Completely, without interruption, each man building his own internal architecture of the situation. When he finished, the first voice was Dutch. "They're not trying to win the legal fight," Dutch said. "They're trying to run out the clock." "Explain," said a man named Cord, late 40s, former wildland firefighter, the kind of quiet that came from spending weeks in burning forests learning exactly which sounds mattered. "The variance application has a review deadline," Dutch said. "If Meridian gets the variance before Ronan's application clears, before he can establish standing as Maisie's guardian, then Claire Rowan's objection dies with the procedural timeline. They don't need to bury Ronan permanently. They just need to slow him down long enough." "And the photograph?" Cord said. "Throws sand in the gears," Bishop said. "Triggers a formal review, delays the application by weeks, maybe kills it entirely depending on how the adjudicator reads it." "So we need Claire Rowan," Trey said. "We need Claire Rowan, and we need her before the photograph review convenes," Ronan said. Patricia estimated 10 days before the formal hearing. "Bishop," Cutter said. "Still working it," Bishop said. "I have 3 possible locations based on her known contacts. She doesn't have family in state. There's an aunt in Nevada, Laughlin, a former co-worker in Prescott, and a women's shelter in Sedona that takes referrals through a specific legal aid network that—" He stopped. The way Bishop stopped was not the way a man stops because he's lost his train of thought. It was the way a man stops because his train of thought has just arrived somewhere he didn't expect, and he's deciding in real time whether to say what he sees. "What?" Ronan said. "The legal aid network that refers to the Sedona shelter," Bishop said slowly. "I know that network. I ran across it in 2019 during the Prescott situation." The room shifted. The Prescott situation was known to the full table. It was not discussed in detail and would not be now. The network has a lawyer in Flagstaff, Bishop said, a woman named Vera Castillo. She takes cases for displaced tenants, specifically cases involving predatory redevelopment. She's filed 4 suits against Meridian Holdings in the last 3 years. He stopped again. And, Ronan said, and her office was broken into 6 days ago, Bishop said. Files taken, no arrest. The Flagstaff PD report describes it as a burglary, probable opportunistic. He looked at Ronan. Nothing was stolen except case files. The fluorescent light stuttered above them. Outside, the wind had come up and was moving through the compound with a low, consistent sound like something breathing. Meridian, Garrett said. That's my read, Bishop said. They're cleaning the legal landscape, Dutch said, taking out the objectors one at a time. Claire Rowan moved out of state. Vera Castillo's files stolen. The other 16 tenants who filed the original objection. Find out where they are, Ronan said. He looked at Garrett. Tonight. Garrett was already typing. The room was quiet except for the wind and the stuttering light and the particular quality of 19 men renegotiating their understanding of a situation's scale. Ronan watched their faces, not for doubt, but for the calculation. The moment when each man understood that what they were dealing with was not a bully with lawyers, but something more organized, more patient, more willing to cause harm across multiple fronts simultaneously. Trace said quietly, "This is bigger than a little girl." "It was always bigger than a little girl," Ronan said, "but she's why we're in it." Garrett found 3 of the 17 original objectors by midnight. Of the remaining 14, 7 had moved with no forwarding address in the previous 4 months. 2 had experienced sudden and unexplained employment terminations that had resulted in lost housing. 3 were unreachable at their last known numbers, and 2. Garrett delivered this with the flat, careful voice of a man maintaining professional distance from information that horrified him, had filed for bankruptcy within 30 days of the variance application moving forward, in proceedings that showed the clear fingerprints of legal pressure rather than genuine insolvency. This was not a real estate dispute. This was a systematic campaign of coercion conducted with the resources and patience of something institutional. "How much is the variance worth?" Riggs said. "Conservative estimate we had was 6 times assessed value," Bishop said. "But I went deeper today." He opened his laptop on the workbench beside Ronan. "Meridian isn't the end of the chain. Meridian is owned through 2 holding entities. The second one has a parent company registered in Delaware." He turned the screen. "The parent company has a development contract contingent on the variance approval. A contract for mixed commercial development worth—" He stopped, made the number available on the screen rather than saying it. The room looked. Cord said, "That's not real estate money." "No," Bishop said. "That's infrastructure money. There's a federal broadband expansion grant attached to the development plan. The grant requires local commercial presence in the zone. The zone is these 11 properties." He closed the laptop. "The grant is worth 4 times the development contract." "And the grant approval timeline?" Dutch said. 60 days after the variance," Garrett said, "which was filed 18 months ago, which means—" "They've been running this for 18 months, Ronan said. "At minimum." He put both hands on the workbench. He looked at the floor. He did the arithmetic. 18 months. A coordinated, funded, legally sophisticated operation to clear 11 properties of tenants with the standing to object. 17 people who'd filed a formal complaint. One by one, moved or silenced or financially destroyed. A young mother in a motel, 1 envelope away from the street, with a 7-year-old who was not a target, was never a target, but who had become, in the machinery of this, a very useful lever. Get Claire Rowan out of the picture. Create a custody situation that occupied any potential protector, anyone trying to help Claire's daughter, in months of bureaucratic process while the variance clock ran down. And if someone unexpected showed up and moved faster than they'd calculated, someone with resources and men and a reason to push, bury him in his own history. The Williams photograph, which had been in someone's possession for 5 years, which had appeared in a legal filing within days of Ronan's first meeting with Patricia, which meant someone had been holding it in reserve, which meant someone had known or suspected that Ronan would become involved, which meant, he said, who told them I'd come for her? The room went very still. Not the stillness of confusion, the stillness of a room in which the same terrible thought had just occurred to 19 different people simultaneously. Garrett, Ronan said, his voice was completely flat. The Williams photograph. 5 years. Somebody held it for 5 years and deployed it the moment I appeared in this situation. That means they either monitored me continuously for 5 years, unlikely, Garrett said, the resource investment, or someone close to this situation flagged me the moment I became relevant and connected me to existing material. The motel manager, Bishop said immediately. Claire left the note. The manager didn't know about Williams, Ronan said. He'd have had to flag me to someone who did, which means he'd have to know who to flag me to, which is a chain too long. He looked at Bishop. Sandra Pruitt. Bishop was quiet. Sandra Pruitt knew who I was the moment she saw my patch, Ronan said. She knew the forge. She was familiar enough with the name to look me up, or she already had information. She gave me the licensing number. That's not, Bishop started. She gave me the number before I asked for it, Ronan said. I asked what I'd need to do to be on the rotation. She gave me a number. That's not standard procedure, is it? Bishop's jaw moved once. No, standard procedure is to direct potential applicants to the county website. She moved me toward the process quickly, Ronan said, which put me on record with the licensing office, which created documentation, which gave Meridian's lawyers something to file against. The fluorescent light stuttered 3 times in rapid succession. You're saying Sandra Pruitt set you up, Trace said. I'm saying Sandra Pruitt accelerated my visibility in a system that was already being monitored, Ronan said. Whether she knew what she was doing or why, I don't know yet. She seemed genuine, Cutter said. Carefully. The way Cutter said things when he wanted to believe something and was interrogating whether the belief was earned. She might be genuine and still be compromised, Bishop said. Could be she has her own version of the Williams problem, something Meridian's people found and used. Find out, Ronan said. I need time. You have until morning. Bishop looked at him. Something passed between them that required no translation. The acknowledgement that until morning was not reasonable, and that neither of them was operating in reasonable time anymore. Until morning, Bishop said. It was after 2 a.m. when Garrett came to find Ronan. He was outside, had been outside for an hour, leaning against the far side of the garage wall where the light didn't reach, with cold air and a sky that had gone fully overcast, pressing down low the way Arizona winter skies did when the Pacific weather system came through and turned the desert temporarily unrecognizable. His collar was up. His hands were in his jacket pockets. He'd been standing there with the weight of the evening against his back and the dark ahead of him and doing the thing he sometimes needed to do. Nothing. Just standing. Just breathing the cold. Just giving the machinery inside his skull a moment without input. Garrett came around the corner and stopped a respectful distance away. He had his laptop under one arm, and his face was doing the thing it did when the news was not news. He wanted to be the person delivering. Tell me, Ronan said. The Williams photograph, Garrett said. I traced the file origin. It went into Meridian's lawyer's possession through a third-party investigation firm, the kind that operates in the overlap between licensed PI work and less defined activities. The firm is based in Phoenix, he paused. The firm has a prior working relationship with one client in the Forge's operational history. Ronan looked at him. Wade Callum, Garrett said. The name moved through Ronan like cold water through stone. Wade Callum had been a Black Forge writer, patched in 2014. Removed in 2017 under circumstances that had never been made public within the club's broader network, that only the men present at the table that year had full knowledge of, and that had resulted in a vote Ronan still regarded as the most difficult single decision of his presidency. Callum had been removed for providing information to an outside party, an event operator who had wanted leverage against the Forge for reasons that were entirely self-interested, and who had paid for it, and whom the Forge had subsequently dealt with through legal means and a great deal of patience. Callum had left the state. To Ronan's knowledge, he had not been heard from since. Callum gave the investigation firm the photograph, Ronan said. More than that, Garrett said. He opened the laptop. On the screen was a document, a compiled file, the kind that represented months of accumulated information, Ronan's name at the top, his address, his business interests, his associates, his history, the forge's history. Event logs, dates, locations. The Williams warehouse was 3 items from the top. Callum's been building this for years, Garrett said. Not for Meridian specifically. I don't think he knew about Meridian until recently. I think he compiled this as an insurance product, something to sell to whoever might want it. He closed the laptop. When Meridian's investigation firm started pulling background on individuals connected to the Rowan case after Claire entered the system, after the note to the motel manager was photographed as standard intake documentation, they found Callum's product for sale. And bought it, Ronan said. Yes. He stood in the dark outside his garage with the overcast sky pressing down and the wind moving across the desert floor in long, cold sweeps, and his hands in his pockets where they couldn't do anything he'd regret. Wade Callum. A man who had sat at this table, had eaten in this kitchen, had ridden beside him for 3 years, had been given the benefit of the doubt longer than the evidence warranted because Ronan had chosen to believe, that the loyalty of the men he'd built this club around was structural rather than conditional, had compiled a file on him, for years, for sale to anyone with the money and the motive. Is Callum in state? Ronan said. Yes, Garrett said. He's been in Scottsdale for 8 months, the same city as Meridian's law firm. A pause. I don't think that's coincidence. No, Ronan said. Neither do I. He pushed off the wall. He went inside. He found Cutter in the kitchen, awake, coffee in front of him, the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting for someone to come back from a bad place with bad news and has prepared himself accordingly. Ronan sat down across from him. He said, Callum. Cutter's face did not move for a long moment. Then something moved in his eyes, deep, private, the specific pain of a betrayal that confirms a thing you'd spent years hoping you were wrong about. Where? Cutter said. Scottsdale. How long has he been building it? At least 3 years. Cutter put both hands around his coffee mug. He looked at the table. His jaw worked once. Cutter. Ronan waited until the man looked up at him. I need to know if there's anything else he had access to, anything beyond Williams. The silence was the answer. Ronan watched it. 2016, Cutter said, finally, quietly. The thing in Kingman. Ronan went still. He was there, Cutter said. Not the action itself, but after. He was there after, when we were cleaning it up. He saw... He stopped. He saw enough. The Kingman situation, 2016, an event that the Forge had handled because a family had come to them with nowhere else to go, and a law enforcement apparatus that had looked the other way, and a man who needed to be stopped without leaving the kind of evidence trail that required explaining. It had been clean. It had been right. It had been documented, apparently, by a man with a phone and a grudge he was still compiling at that point. If they have Kingman, Ronan said. It doesn't matter whether we were right, Cutter said. It only matters what it looks like. The kitchen was very quiet. The overhead light was steady here, no stutter, and it lit the table and the 2 coffee mugs and the 2 men sitting across from each other with the accumulated weight of an organization that had tried across 10 years to do the right thing through methods that the right thing sometimes did not accommodate. Ronan said, They're not going to use it for the Foster application. Cutter looked at him. They're going to use it as leverage, Ronan said. Not to prosecute, to control. If I back off the application, if I walk away from Maisie, if I stop looking for Claire Rowan, if I stop pulling the thread on Meridian, the file stays buried. If I don't, he stopped. The end of the sentence was clear enough. That's not a threat, Cutter said. That's a leash. Yes. Cutter was quiet for a long time. Outside, the wind moved through the compound, and somewhere a door rattled in its frame with a low, insistent sound. What do we do? Cutter said. Ronan looked at his hands. He thought about every version of this he could thread, the ones where he backed off, where he handed Maisie's future over to the machinery of the county and the predatory patience of Meridian Holdings, and let himself believe that someone good would find her eventually, that the system would route around its own corruption and land a 7-year-old girl somewhere warm and permanent and safe. He thought about a motel note. Please make sure someone good finds her. He thought about a drawing of a house. He thought about his own kitchen, 8 years quiet, and the room down the hall with the east-facing window. He thought about Emma. He let himself think about her for longer than 1 minute. He broke the rule he'd made and held her there in his mind. The weight of her, the specific warmth of a 4-year-old's hand in his, the way she'd said daddy with the particular confidence of a child who has never once doubted that the word will be answered. He let himself feel the full weight of having failed her. And then he felt something shift, not heal, not resolve, but rotate slightly, the way a lens rotates when you find the correct focal length. And he understood that he had been carrying the weight of Emma not as memory, but as punishment. As the sentence he'd given himself for the gate left unlatched, as proof that he was not the kind of person who got to protect things. He understood that he had been wrong about that. Not about the gate, about the sentence. "We don't back down," he said. His voice was level and quiet and completely certain. "We find Claire Rowan. We find a way to get her testimony into the legal record before the variance hearing. We pull Hobbs out of Maisie's case through whatever channels Sandra can provide. And we walk into the custody hearing with everything we have, and we make them show us what they've got. And if they show it, then we deal with what they show." Ronan, if Kingman— "I know," he said. "I know exactly what it means. I'm not asking anyone else to carry it, but I need to know if the men at this table are with me." Cutter looked at him for a long moment. "You already know the answer to that," he said. "I need to hear it anyway." Cutter picked up his coffee. He drank. He set it down. "Every man at this table," he said, "has something Callum could sell. You think you're the only one with a photograph somewhere? You think any of us got here without a thing in the dark that we handled the wrong way for the right reason?" His voice was rough and direct and completely without self-pity. "We're with you. That's not loyalty. That's arithmetic." The wind outside, the rattling door, the steady kitchen light. Ronan nodded once, then his phone rang. Unknown number. Arizona area code. The same configuration as the parking lot call. He answered. The voice was the same. Male, deliberate, the register of consequence without specification. "Mr. Voss, I understand you've been asking questions about our business interests." "I have," Ronan said. "I'm going to make you a direct offer. Walk away from the Rowan child's case. Withdraw your application. Stop looking for Claire Rowan. Do this in the next 48 hours, and I will personally ensure that certain materials currently in our possession are destroyed permanently. And if I don't?" A pause. The kind of pause that was not hesitation, but theater. The beat of a man who had made many offers and knew exactly the effect of the silence before the second term. "Then tomorrow morning, I file a supplemental complaint with the Arizona Department of Child Safety, alleging that a minor in county placement has been in contact with a person under active federal investigation." Ronan's blood went cold. "I'm not under federal investigation," he said. "You will be," the voice said. "By tomorrow morning. It takes one call." The line went dead. He set the phone on the table. Cutter was watching him. "They can manufacture a federal investigation," Ronan said. "Not a real one, but a formal inquiry, something on letterhead that looks official for long enough to trigger an immediate suspension of my visitation rights, an automatic hold on my application, and—" He stopped. "And what?" Cutter said. "And a mandatory review of Maisie's current placement," Ronan said, "which means Hobbs, their man inside, gets to recommend a new placement location. Of their choosing. The full shape of it landed in the kitchen like something dropped from a height. They weren't after Ronan. They'd never been after Ronan. Ronan was the obstacle. Maisie was the leverage. And the leverage was about to be moved to a location controlled by the people using her. "They're going to take her," Cutter said. "Not take," Ronan said. "Relocate, legally. Through the system they've already compromised." He stood up. His chair scraped back on the tile. "Which is going to happen in approximately—" He looked at the clock. 6 hours. When the county office opens. He was already moving. "Wake everyone up," he said. "We're going to Flagstaff." Cutter was on his feet before the sentence finished. And Cutter, Ronan stopped in the doorway. Call Sandra Pruitt, right now. Whatever she is to Meridian, compromised or coerced or genuinely crooked, she is also the only person who can pull Hobbs's access before morning. He paused. Tell her what's happening, all of it. And tell her that a little girl is going to be moved to a location controlled by the people who threatened her mother, and ask her if that's the outcome she planned for. Cutter reached for his phone. Outside, the wind had dropped. The compound was very still and very dark. And in that stillness, somewhere across the desert, in a house that wasn't home, in a room that wasn't hers, a 7-year-old girl with a pink backpack was sleeping, still safe, still unaware, still drawing motorcycles on napkins in her sleep for all Ronan knew, still waiting for Wednesday. He had until 6 a.m. to make sure Wednesday was still possible. He walked to his bike. He started the engine. The sound of it came up through the cold and the dark like an answer to a question nobody had said out loud yet, and it was the only answer that mattered. I'm not stopping. I'm not backing down. Come at me with everything you have. I've been carrying heavier things than this for 8 years, and I'm still here. They rode out of Ash Fork at 3:47 in the morning. 19 bikes. No headlight formation, no riding loose, tight column, 2 abreast, the kind of formation that ate highway in long, deliberate swallows and announced itself to the dark like a thing that had decided. The temperature was 29 degrees and the overcast had broken into fragments, so there were stars between the clouds, and the stars were very bright and very cold, and the road ahead was empty in both directions as far as the headlights reached. Ronan ran point, Cutter on his right. Behind them, Bishop and Dutch, then Garrett and Cord, then the rest in pairs back to Solano and Trace at the tail. Nobody spoke on the ride. The engine spoke. The road spoke. The cold came in at every gap and every collar and found the sweat underneath and turned it sharp. Ronan ran the arithmetic as he rode. 6 a.m., county offices open. Hobbs files the placement review, triggers the mandatory protocol. Maisie gets moved within 24 hours of the filing, maximum, possibly same day if Meridian's people had positioned a cooperating placement household in advance, which was the kind of thing an 18-month operation would absolutely have done. Once she was in a controlled placement, getting her back out required a legal process that would take weeks under ideal circumstances and months under obstruction. He had 2 hours and 13 minutes to prevent that from happening. Sandra Pruitt had answered Cutter's call on the 3rd ring, which meant she either slept lightly or had been awake. The conversation Cutter reported was short and had a quality Cutter described as she already knew something was wrong. She'd confirmed that the administrative reshuffle assigning Hobbs to Maisie's case had been presented to her as routine, generated by the county's case management software, automatic redistribution due to caseload balancing. She'd had no reason to question it. She hadn't questioned it because she hadn't known to. She was questioning it now. She had access to the county's emergency case reassignment protocol, the provision that allowed a supervisor to pull a caseworker off a file due to conflict of interest and reassign within the same working day. She had told Cutter she needed documentation of the financial irregularity before she could use it. Garrett had sent her everything he had on Hobbs's new account within 4 minutes of that request. Whether it was enough, and whether it would reach the right desk before 6 a.m., was the variable Ronan could not control. So he controlled the road. He pushed the Harley to 85 and felt the cold strip everything back to the essential. The vibration in his hands, the push of the wind, the lane markings going white and white and white beneath him in a rhythm that was the closest thing to meditation he had ever found. He thought about Maisie sleeping. He thought about a pink backpack beside a bed in a house that wasn't home. He thought about the east-facing window in a room that was waiting. He thought, hold on, we're coming. They split outside Flagstaff. Bishop, Dutch, and 3 others took a secondary road toward the foster placement address. Not to take the child, they had no legal standing to take the child, and taking the child would detonate everything Ronan had built, but to be present, to be visible, in the way the forge was visible when it needed to be, in the way that large, quiet, dangerous men standing in proximity to a situation changed the temperature of the situation without a word being said. Ronan, Cutter, and Garrett went to Sandra Pruitt's house. She lived in a subdivision off Milton Road, single-story, gray exterior, a sedan in the driveway with a county lanyard hanging from the mirror. She was awake and dressed when they arrived, standing in her open doorway with the porch light on and a tablet in her hand, and she looked at the three men walking up her path in the 4 a.m. dark with their cuts and their boots and their specific gravity, and she did not step back. "I filed the reassignment 20 minutes ago," she said. "Did it go through?" Garrett said. "I'm waiting for confirmation from the duty supervisor." She looked at Ronan directly. "Hobbs is aware something is happening. He got a notification when I initiated the process." "How do you know he's aware?" "He called me 11 minutes ago." "What did he say?" "He said I was making a mistake." Her voice was level. "I told him to have a good night." Something shifted in Ronan's chest, not the fracture from the diner, something older than that. The specific recognition of a person who had found the edge of what they could tolerate and had stepped over it. "He'll call his contact at Meridian," Garrett said. "He already did," Sandra said. "The duty supervisor called me back 3 minutes after Hobbs hung up. There's been—" She paused, the careful word choice of someone reporting something she was still processing. "There's been a call from a Scottsdale number to the county emergency line, claiming a complaint has been filed with a federal agency regarding a person in contact with Maisie Rowan." Ronan said, "They made the call." "Yes, but—" Sandra looked at her tablet. "The duty supervisor is Marlene Pratt. She has been with the county for 22 years. She received the call, and she called me because she said the call felt, in her words, like someone pushing." Sandra looked up. "Marlene doesn't respond well to pushing." "Is the reassignment confirmed?" Cutter said. Sandra's tablet buzzed in her hand. She looked at it. "Yes," she said. "As of 4:14 a.m., Hobbs is off Maisie's case. I'm the primary again." She exhaled, not dramatically, just the release of a person who has been holding something for the length of a process and can now put it down. "She's safe for tonight." Ronan said, "That buys us time, not resolution." "I know. The federal complaint they called in, that triggers a formal inquiry regardless of whether it has substance." "I know that too." She looked at him steadily. "Mr. Voss, I want to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me directly." "Go ahead." "The materials in their complaint, the photograph, the other documentation." She held his gaze. "Is there anything in it that would cause actual harm to this child if she were placed with you? Not legal harm, not administrative harm, actual harm." He met her eyes and held them. "No," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. The porch light buzzed softly between them. In the driveway, her sedan sat under the 4 a.m. dark, the county lanyard turning slightly in the draft from the open door. "Then we fight it," she said. "Whatever they file, wherever they file it. We document the coercion, we document Hobbs's financial connection, and we fight it." "That takes weeks," Garrett said. "Yes," Sandra said. "It does." "The variance hearing is in 9 days. Sandra's jaw tightened. "I know." "If the variance clears, Claire Rowan's objection dies. The operation closes. They don't need leverage anymore." He paused. "They also don't need Maisie anymore, which means she goes back into the rotation and stays there." The subdivision was very quiet around them. A dog barked somewhere 3 streets over and stopped. The cold settled deeper. "Claire Rowan," Sandra said. "Find her. Get her back into the process with representation. That's the thread." She looked at Bishop, who had appeared at the edge of the path without anyone noticing him arrive. "Is she alive?" "We believe so," Bishop said. "We have a location we haven't confirmed yet." "Sedona," Ronan said. "The women's shelter," Sandra said immediately. She knew it. Of course she knew it. "Vera Castillo's network." "Vera Castillo's files were stolen 6 days ago," Garrett said. Sandra's face went through something. "If they got to Claire through Vera's files, we don't know that yet," Ronan said. "That's why we're going to Sedona." The shelter in Sedona was not listed publicly. Bishop had the address through a chain of contacts that had taken him 3 hours and 6 phone calls to build, and he delivered it in the truck on the way down 89A with the specific terseness of a man who understood the weight of the information he was handling. They went in 2 vehicles, Ronan's truck and Bishop's pickup, left the bikes in a lot off the highway. The shelter's anonymity was its protection, and arriving in a column of Harleys was not the arrival the situation needed. The sun was coming up behind the red rocks as they pulled off the highway, and the light was the color of something just beginning, amber and cold and flat, spreading across the butte faces without warmth, the kind of light that showed you everything without making it beautiful yet. The shelter was a converted house set back from the road behind a screen of juniper, with no signage and a single camera above the door that Ronan recognized as expensive and intentional. He parked on the road. He got out alone. He walked to the door and knocked, and stood back where the camera could see him fully. A long pause. A woman's voice through an intercom. "What do you need?" "My name is Ronan Voss. I'm looking for Claire Rowan. I have her daughter." Not entirely accurate, but the most accurate compression of a complicated truth that he could deliver in 10 seconds to a woman behind an intercom at 6 in the morning. Another pause. Longer. The door opened. The woman who opened it was in her 50s, angular, with the specific composure of someone who had spent decades managing crises for other people and had achieved a fundamental unshockability. She looked at Ronan's cut, his face, the scar, the size of him, and she did not change her expression. "You're the biker from the diner," she said. He stared. "Excuse me." "Claire described you. She said a biker in a roadside diner was the only person who stayed with Maisie until CPS arrived. She found out your name from the deputy's report." She studied him. "She's been waiting to know if you were going to come." The sun was moving across the rock faces now, the amber going toward something warmer, and Ronan stood in the doorway of a shelter in Sedona in the growing light and understood that Claire Rowan had known about him for weeks and had been waiting, not for rescue, not to be extracted, but to know whether the man her daughter had walked toward in a broken sign diner was the kind of man who stayed. "She's here," he said. "She's here," the woman confirmed, "and she's ready to talk." Claire Rowan was 31 and looked 40. Not in the way of someone who had lived carelessly, but in the way of someone who had carried too much for too long and had the specific hollowness of a person running on the residue of courage after the primary supply was gone. She was sitting at a table in a small room with a window facing the junipers, and she had a coffee in front of her and her hands around it the same way Maisie held mugs. And when Ronan came in, she looked at him with eyes that were Maisie's eyes in an older, more damaged face. He sat down across from her. He said, "Your daughter is safe." She exhaled. The exhalation had been inside her for weeks, and it came out as a single long breath that was not quite a sob and not quite relief, but occupied the territory between them where those things live when they can't afford to be themselves fully. "She went to the diner," Claire said, "like I told her." "You told her about the diner?" "I told her if anything ever happened, to go somewhere that had been there a long time. I'd pointed out Maze when we stopped there 2 months ago. I told her—" She stopped. Her hands tightened on the mug. "I told her the men with the motorcycles would make sure she was okay." Ronan said nothing. "That sounds insane," Claire said. "I know how it sounds." "No," he said. "It doesn't." She looked at him. Something in her face shifted. The particular recalibration of a person who has prepared for one version of a conversation and found themselves in a different one. "They came to me 4 months ago," she said. "Meridian's people. A man in a suit, very polite, very clear." She said this without inflection, not because it didn't hurt, but because she'd already processed the hurt into something functional. He said the objection I'd filed was going to make my life difficult. He said my housing situation was precarious. He said my daughter's situation was— he used the word precarious twice. He threatened Maisie. He said the word precarious. He didn't have to say anything else. She looked at her coffee. "I had 60 days to withdraw my objection and vacate the property. Voluntarily. If I didn't—" She stopped. He had photographs of me. From 2019, a situation I was in that I'm not proud of, that had nothing to do with anything except that I was 26 and broke and made a decision I've spent 6 years paying for. What kind of photographs? The kind that lose you custody of your child in a family court proceeding. He sat with that. The systematic brutality of it, the careful cultivation of leverage across years, the patient assembly of ammunition for people who might one day need moving. You stayed anyway, he said. You filed the objection. For 14 months I stayed, she said. Me and 16 other people. We thought if we held together they couldn't move all of us. Something dark moved across her face. They could. One at a time. Very slowly. Very legally. She looked at him. 3 months ago, I was the last one left. Why didn't you go to law enforcement? Vera Castillo tried to build that case with me. We were 6 weeks from having something solid enough to take to the state AG. Claire's voice went flat. Then her office was broken into. I got a call from the same polite man the same day. He said the files were gone and the situation had changed and I had 48 hours. And you left. I left Maisie somewhere safe, she said. I'm not going to call it leaving. He looked at this woman, the same age as some of the men he'd recruited to the forge, years younger than he'd understood her situation to require her to be, and he thought about what it had cost her to walk out of that motel room in the dark with her daughter sleeping behind her, leaving a note with a motel manager she barely knew, trusting a broken-sign diner and the motorcycle club parked in front of it with the only thing in her life that mattered. There was a copy, she said. He looked up. Vera's files. I made a copy. 2 weeks before the break-in, because Vera told me to. Paranoid, she said. Probably nothing, but... Claire stood up. She went to the window. She reached behind a loose section of baseboard beneath the sill. Exactly the kind of hiding place a woman who had learned not to trust surfaces would use. And she produced a thumb drive. She set it on the table. 18 months of documentation, she said. Bank records, communications, timelines connecting Meridian's principles to the tenant displacement campaign, photographs of the suit who visited me, signed statements from 4 of the other objectors before they scattered. She looked at Ronan. And a recorded conversation between the man who visited me and a person he called during our meeting, someone he reported to, someone who used a name I wrote down. What name? Harlan Briggs, she said. I didn't know it then. I looked it up after. He's a managing partner at the development company that holds the federal grant contract. She held his gaze. He's also on the Arizona State Infrastructure Advisory Board. The room was very still. Not a real estate operation. Not a local predatory developer. A federal grant. A state board member. An 18-month systematic campaign to clear land for a project with public funding and private profit conducted through coercion, manufactured leverage, and the quiet displacement of people too poor and isolated to fight back. And somewhere in the machinery of all of it, a 7-year-old girl who had walked 3 miles in the cold toward a broken neon sign because her mother had taught her that the men with motorcycles would make it okay. Ronan picked up the thumb drive. He looked at it in his hand. We need to get you to Flagstaff, he said. Today. There's a lawyer, not Castillo, someone new, who can take your statement and file for an emergency injunction against the variance hearing. They'll come after me, Claire said. The photographs, let them file them, he said. We'll file back with everything on this drive. You want to know which story a judge pays more attention to? A mother's 6-year-old mistake or an 18-month documented coercion campaign involving a state board member and federal grant money? He paused. That's not even a close question. She looked at him for a long moment. Why are you doing this? She said. It was the same question Maisie had asked in the county facility. Why are you doing this? He gave her the same honest answer. Because your daughter sat down across from me and she wasn't afraid, he said. And she reminded me that I still had something left to do. Claire picked up her coffee. Her hands were steadier than they'd been when he'd walked in. There's one more thing, she said. On the drive. A name that connects Meridian's legal operation to the investigation firm that compiled the file on you. She looked at him directly. A man named Wade Callum provided your personal history to Meridian's lawyers. The drive has the transaction record. I know about Callum. You know he provided the file, Claire said. Do you know why? Ronan held her gaze. Callum was removed from your club, she said. I know because it's in the documentation. Meridian's people backgrounded him before they bought his product. They noted the removal. They noted the reason. She paused. The reason wasn't just information selling. The reason was that Callum had a prior relationship with one of Meridian's board members, a financial relationship that predated his time in your club by 3 years. The cold moved through him. He was placed, Ronan said. Claire said nothing. She didn't need to. Callum had not been a recruit who went bad. Callum had been an asset, someone put inside the forge with the specific purpose of building leverage, holding it, waiting for the moment it was needed. 3 years in the club, building the file, building the access, building the appearance of loyalty until loyalty was no longer the calculation. Who had recruited Callum in the first place was a question that reached backward through the forge's history and touched things Ronan was going to have to examine. Not today. Not in this room. We need to move, he said. He stood up. He put the thumb drive in his jacket pocket beside the folded napkin. The drawing that was still there, still pressed against his chest, still carrying its small, careful image of a house and 2 motorcycles. He looked at Claire. Your daughter is waiting, he said. She picked up a bag from the floor beside her chair. Small, practical, the bag of a woman who had been living in a shelter for 3 weeks and had reduced her needs to what could be carried quickly. She stood up. She took 1 breath. Okay, she said. They went out through the juniper screen door into the Sedona morning, the red rocks burning now in the full sun, the sky above them going from pale to the deep particular blue of high desert winter. And the air was cold and clean, and the trucks were where they'd left them. And Bishop was leaning against the hood of his with a coffee he'd produced from somewhere. And when he saw Claire Rowan come through the door, he straightened up and looked at Ronan. Ronan nodded. Bishop pulled out his phone and called Dutch. We have her, he said. Meet us in Flagstaff. And tell Garrett we need the lawyer. They drove north on 89A with the sun coming over the rocks behind them, and Ronan drove with the thumb drive in his pocket and the drawing against his chest, and the road unwinding ahead of him in the cold morning light, and his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. Arizona area code. Not the same number as before. He answered. The voice was different, older, the kind of voice that comes from a person who has never in their life needed to make the preliminary call, who is accustomed to being the call that comes after everything else has failed. Mr. Voss. Speaking. My name is Harlan Briggs. I believe we have a mutual problem. Ronan said nothing. He drove. The red rocks fell away behind him, and the high desert spread out in the morning light, and the road was empty ahead. You have something I want, Briggs said. I have something you want. I think we're both smart enough to understand that prolonged conflict here costs us both more than a reasonable accommodation would. What do you think I want? Ronan said. The child, Briggs said, and an uncontested foster application. And what do you think you want? A pause. Not the theatrical pause of the previous calls. The genuine pause of a man who has made many negotiations and knows how to let silence do its work. The drive, Briggs said. Ms. Rowan's documentation. Delivered to me today, in exchange for the withdrawal of all complaints against your application and a letter of non-opposition to the foster placement from Meridian's legal team. Ronan drove. The engine was steady under him. The heater was running. Beside him, Claire Rowan was looking straight ahead at the road, and he could feel from 3 feet away the particular quality of her stillness, the stillness of a woman who had already given up everything once and was deciding whether she had anything left to give. You understand what's on that drive, Ronan said. I understand exactly what's on it. Then you understand that handing it to you doesn't end the problem. It relocates it. He kept his voice level. Because I know what's on it, and the woman beside me knows what's on it, and the men behind us know pieces of it. You don't buy silence with a drive, you buy a delay. A longer pause. What do you want, Mr. Voss? A custody hearing, Ronan said. Clean. No interference, no manufactured federal complaints, no coordinated objections, no Hobbs inside the system. He paused. And the variance withdrawn. The variance... The voice shifted register for the first time. Just slightly. The first crack in the professional surface. That's not something I can... Then we have nothing to talk about, Ronan said, and the drive goes to the state AG this afternoon. The line was silent. In the silence, Ronan could hear the quality of a man recalculating, the specific sound of someone who has built a structure over 18 months and is now hearing the load-bearing elements fail one by one and doing the arithmetic of what can be saved. I need time, Briggs said. You have until the custody hearing, Ronan said. That's 9 days. In 9 days, I walk into a courtroom with Claire Rowan's testimony and a family law attorney and everything on that drive. What you do with the next 9 days is your business. He ended the call. He drove. Claire said quietly, Did that work? I don't know, he said honestly. Are we safe? He looked at the road ahead. The empty high desert under the winter sun, the highway running north toward Flagstaff, the mountains in the far distance holding their cap of snow. Behind him, Bishop's truck was steady in the mirror. Not yet, he said, but we're closer than we were this morning. His phone buzzed. Cutter. He answered. Trace just called in, Cutter said. Someone drove past the foster placement house twice in the last 40 minutes. Dark SUV, tinted windows. Ronan's hands tightened on the wheel. Is Bishop's details still on it? 3 men outside, but Ronan... Cutter's voice carried something Ronan had rarely heard in it. One of the men outside just found a note on his bike. What kind of note? A photograph, Cutter said, of the front of the house, with a time stamp. He paused. From 45 minutes ago, before the detail arrived. They'd been there first. They'd been watching before the forge was watching. They knew the placement address, and they'd left a message not to warn off the forge. Leaving a message to warn off the forge would be conceding that the forge's presence mattered. They'd left a message to show that they already had everything they needed and that Ronan's 9-day deadline was a courtesy they were not obligated to extend. Get Marlene Pratt on the phone, Ronan said. Sandra's supervisor. Tell her we need an emergency protective relocation for Maisie Rowan. Today. Tell her why. She'll need documentation. Send her everything Garrett has on Hobbs. Right now. He was doing 90 and the road was empty ahead of him. And Cutter? Yeah. Get everyone to Flagstaff, Ronan said. All of them. Every man who can ride. A pause. How many? Cutter said. Ronan thought about a little girl adjusting backpack straps. He thought about a napkin drawing. He thought about a woman who had walked into the dark trusting a broken sign and the sound of Harley engines. He thought about the courtroom ahead of them, the hearing, the judge, the question that was coming, why should this child trust you? And he understood, fully, for the first time, that the answer to that question was not going to come from him alone. Everyone, he said. He ended the call. He pressed the accelerator down. The road opened up ahead of them, and the mountains came closer, and the sun was all the way up now, burning off the last of the night cold. And somewhere in Flagstaff, a 7-year-old girl was waking up for the day in a house that wasn't home. And the men who had decided she was family were coming down the mountain toward her with everything they had left. And in 9 days there would be a courtroom and a judge and a question, and the answer was already riding north on every road that led to the city, engines running, the sound of them carrying across the high desert in the cold, clear morning like something that had made up its mind and was not going to be stopped. But first they had to get through the next 9 days. And Harlan Briggs had just shown them that he was willing to move before they were ready. And somewhere in a dark SUV with tinted windows, someone had already taken a photograph of the house where Maisie Rowan was sleeping. And the next move was not Ronan's. It was theirs. And it was already in motion. The dark SUV made its move at 7:43 in the morning. Bishop saw it first because Bishop had positioned himself at the corner of the block with a sight line to the foster placement house. And because 11 years as a street detective had given him a particular sensitivity to the specific quality of a vehicle that is not passing through, but arriving with intent. It came from the north. It slowed at the house without stopping. The careful non-stop of someone checking an address against a prior knowledge, and then it continued to the end of the block and sat. Bishop called Ronan. They're here, he said. Ronan was 12 minutes out. Hold position. They're not moving yet. Hold. In the foster placement house, a woman named Ruth Hendricks, 61, retired schoolteacher, 4 years on the county's approved list, The kind of person who became a foster parent because she had a large house and a larger capacity for love, and the particular stubbornness of someone who had seen too many children fall through institutional cracks to pretend it wasn't her problem, had been awake since 5. Sandra Pruitt had called her at 4:30. Ruth had listened to what Sandra told her, asked 2 questions, and then said, in the voice of a woman who had managed 31 years of other people's children, "I'll have her ready." When Ronan's truck pulled up, Ruth was on the porch. Maisie was beside her, backpack on, coat zipped, the careful braid done fresh. She was holding Ruth's hand with the particular grip of a child who has learned to hold tightly to the things she isn't sure about keeping. She saw Ronan come up the path and went very still. Then she walked down the porch steps and crossed the yard and stopped in front of him. She looked at his face the same way she'd looked at it in the diner. The complete, honest assessment of a child who has no use for the version of him he'd prefer to present. "You came before Wednesday," she said. "Plans changed." "Is my mom okay?" He crouched down to her eye level. "Your mom is in a car 2 minutes behind mine. She's coming." Maisie's face did something he had no architecture for describing, the collapse of a held thing, not into grief but into something that grief had been blocking, the specific release of a child who has been holding herself together across weeks of uncertainty and has just been given permission to stop. She didn't cry. Her eyes went very bright, and her jaw worked once, and she breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth, and she held herself together with the last of whatever she'd been using. "Okay," she said. "Okay." Behind him, Bishop's voice on the phone. "SUV's moving." Ronan stood. He looked at Ruth. "Get inside and stay away from the front windows." Ruth put her hand on Maisie's shoulder and moved her back toward the porch without a word. This was a woman who had spent 31 years managing chaos with small bodies in proximity, and she knew how to move without making it frightening. The black SUV came around the corner. It slowed. It stopped at the curb. The driver's window came down. The man behind it was 40-something. The suit from the motel, probably. Ronan couldn't confirm the face, but the posture matched Claire's description. Contained, professional, the specific bearing of someone whose job was to deliver messages that other people didn't want to receive. He looked at Ronan standing in the front yard of the foster placement house. He looked at the 2 trucks parked at the curb. He looked at Bishop against the corner wall. He looked further down the street, where 2 more Forge men had appeared from the direction they'd come. He looked at the opposite end of the block. 2 more. He looked back at Ronan. Ronan said nothing. He put his hands in his jacket pockets and stood in the yard and met the man's eyes and did not move. The window went up. The SUV drove away. Bishop said, "He's heading north." "Let him go," Ronan said. He turned back to the porch. Maisie was in the doorway, half behind Ruth, watching the disappearing car with the focused attention of a child who has learned that threats come in the shape of ordinary vehicles. "Is he gone?" she said. "He's gone." She came back down the steps. She stood beside Ronan and watched the empty end of the street. "He came to see us before," she said. "At the motel. He talked to my mom." "I know." "She seemed scared after." "I know that too." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "She didn't leave because she wanted to." "No," he said. "She didn't." She looked up at him. "Did you know that?" "I worked it out." She nodded slowly, absorbing it, processing it with the methodical quiet of a child who has had to do a great deal of unsupported processing and has gotten quite good at it. "Okay," she said, for the second time. In a different register than the first. Less relief, more resolution. The okay of a person closing a file rather than opening one. Behind them, a car came around the corner. Maisie turned, and Claire Rowan got out of Bishop's truck. There are moments that do not belong to the people watching them, and Ronan understood this one clearly enough to look away. He turned toward the street and studied the middle distance and gave the 2 of them the 30 feet and the open air and whatever sound and movement passed between them in those first seconds without an audience. Ruth came to stand beside him on the path. She was a quiet woman, Ruth, had the quality of someone who had long since learned that presence didn't require speech. "She's a good girl," Ruth said after a while. "I know," Ronan said. "She drew on every piece of paper I had in the house." a beat. She drew your motorcycles on my grocery list. He didn't say anything, but something moved in his face that he didn't try to stop. She talked about you, Ruth said. Every day. He looked at his boots. The yard grass was winter dead and pale, and the morning light was still low and flat across it, and his shadow stretched long behind him. She's going to need things, Ruth said. Time. Consistency. Someone who doesn't leave without warning. She said this without judgment, the plain professional honesty of a woman who had seen the aftermath of inconsistency in children too many times to be polite about it. She's going to test whether you stay, repeatedly, across a long time. I know. Do you? He looked at her. Yes, he said. I do. Ruth studied him for a moment. She told me the house where you live has motorcycles out front, she said. She said it feels safe. He exhaled once, slow, through his nose. It does now, he said. The 9 days were not simple. Harlan Briggs did not call back. What he did instead was what men of his kind do when direct negotiation fails, and the litigation landscape has turned against them. He began a managed retreat, the kind that looks like orderly process but is the organizational equivalent of burning the documents as you leave. The variance application was not withdrawn. It was quietly suspended pending a voluntary administrative review, which in practice meant it was buried in a procedural holding pattern from which it would not emerge intact. Ronan never knew exactly which call did it. It might have been Patricia at the licensing office, who filed a formal complaint about the coordinated objection campaign with the county attorney's office at 8 a.m. the morning after Ronan called her. It might have been the state AG's office, where Claire's testimony, given through a Flagstaff attorney named Marcus Webb, that Garrett had located through a chain of calls Ronan chose not to trace too carefully, arrived on a Tuesday afternoon and apparently created a significant reaction. It might have been the Arizona State Ethics Board, where a member of the Infrastructure Advisory Board suddenly found himself under a disclosure review. It might have been all of it, the accumulated weight of a documented record that had been kept alive by a woman in a shelter in Sedona who had held onto a thumb drive because Vera Castillo had told her to be paranoid. What mattered was that by the Thursday before the hearing, the manufactured federal complaint had been formally withdrawn. Hobbs had resigned from the county, pending a separate investigation. The Meridian objection to Ronan's foster application had been vacated. The photograph from the Williams warehouse was no longer in any active filing. Wade Callum was in Scottsdale. He would stay there. Ronan had been asked by 3 men in the forge what should be done about Callum, and he had given the same answer each time. Nothing. Not forgiveness. Nothing. The deliberate, considered withholding of action from someone who had bet on Ronan's anger and lost. The worst punishment for a man who had spent years building leverage was to find that the leverage was worthless and nobody was coming. Whether Callum had been placed inside the forge from the beginning, whether the recruitment that brought him to the table 11 years ago had been engineered, was a question that required looking at the history of the club through a different lens, and Ronan had done that looking in the quiet of several late nights, and he had found 2 other names that needed examining, and he had handled that the way he handled all things that required care and restraint, methodically, without rage, without public drama, and with a finality that left no open questions. The club had survived. The table was the table. Whatever had been introduced into it had been removed and the structure held. The custody hearing was on a Thursday. It was the kind of morning that Arizona does only in deep winter. Clear and cold with a sky so blue it looked painted, and the mountains to the north holding their full snow load against the blue like something deliberate. Ronan drove to Flagstaff in the truck, alone. He had told the forge to stand down, and he had meant it, and they had not listened, which was the specific way the forge expressed both loyalty and opinion when it felt the two were compatible. He found out they hadn't listened when he turned onto the street that led to the courthouse. The first bikes were parked 4 blocks out. By the time he reached the courthouse block, they filled both sides of the street as far as he could see, and then more, on the adjacent streets. Not just Black Forge, he understood, as he drove slowly through them. Other cuts, other clubs, Forge-adjacent organizations, men who had ridden at some point alongside someone who'd gotten the word across the state's informal biker network, The communication system that moved faster than any phone tree because it moved on loyalty rather than logistics. He had told Cutter, everyone. Cutter apparently had taken the broader interpretation. He parked and got out. The men were standing. Not in formation, not doing anything organized. Standing the way men stand when they are present for something that matters and understand that their presence is the point. Veterans and mechanics and fathers and men who had been none of those things for a long time. Old cuts and new cuts, and a few men in civilian jackets who'd come anyway. He recognized faces from 3 other states. He recognized men he had last seen at funerals and at hospitals and at the specific kind of gathering that happens when something has gone wrong, and the people who come are the ones who were never going to leave regardless. He walked through them toward the courthouse. Nobody spoke to him. Some of them nodded. That was enough. That was all of it. The engines had cooled by the time he reached the door, and in the silence of hundreds of men not speaking, the only sounds were boots on frozen pavement and the winter wind coming down the boulevard, and something that wasn't nothing. The weight of that many bodies and that much stillness, gathered for no other purpose than to say, "This man. We're with this man." He went inside. What? The courtroom was small. County family court. Fluorescent lights, wood paneling that had seen better decades, the specific institutional smell of every public building that has processed too much human difficulty for too long. The judge was a woman named Honorable Patricia Suan, 62, small, with the unhurried manner of someone who had stopped being impressed by things that were designed to impress a long time ago. Claire was there, with Marcus Webb beside her. Sandra Pruitt was in the gallery. Ruth Hendricks had driven herself and sat near the back with her hands folded in her lap, and an expression of the particular patient expectation of a woman who believes in outcomes that deserve to happen. The proceeding took 2 hours. Marcus Webb presented the documentation, the home study, the psychological evaluation, the training completion certificates, the financial records, the character references that had been collected across the preceding weeks by a process Ronan had not supervised and probably couldn't have replicated if he'd tried. Sandra Pruitt gave a statement. Dr. Renata Solis gave a statement, the text of which Ronan did not hear in full because he was focused on keeping his breathing steady and his hands still. The county attorney's office presented no opposition. The Meridian filing had been vacated. The manufactured federal complaint was on record as withdrawn. Judge Suan asked questions. She asked about the home study. She asked about the psychological evaluation. She asked about his history with the forge, and he answered directly and without qualification. She asked about Emma. He answered. Then she set down the folder in front of her and looked at him over her glasses. "Mr. Voss," she said, "I've been on this bench for 16 years. In that time, I've heard a great many people tell me they can provide stability for a child in need. Many of them believed it genuinely. Fewer of them were correct." She held his gaze. "What I have in front of me is an unusual application. It's also a thorough one, and the opposition to it has, with extraordinary timing, largely evaporated." She looked at the folder. She looked at him. "Why should this child trust you?" she said. The courtroom went quiet, the way rooms go quiet when the question is the only question. He had not prepared an answer. He had thought about it and decided that preparation produced the kind of answer that sounded prepared, and that this question deserved the other kind. "She already does," he said. "I didn't earn that. She gave it to me before I'd done anything to deserve it, which means at some point I'm going to have to deserve it, and I plan to spend however long it takes doing exactly that." He paused. "I'm not going to tell you I'm the obvious choice. I'm a 53-year-old man with a complicated history and a motorcycle club and a psychological profile that probably has interesting footnotes." He kept his voice level and let it be whatever it was. "What I can tell you is that I stayed. When it would have been easier to leave, I stayed. When people with money and lawyers tried to make me leave, I stayed. That's not heroism. That's just the one thing I know how to do that actually matters for a child." He stopped. "She drew a picture of my house and said it felt safe. I don't know how to argue with that better than she already did." Judge Suan looked at him for a long moment. She picked up her pen. She signed. He found Maisie in the waiting room outside with Ruth. She was drawing. Of course she was drawing. She had a pen from Ruth's purse and a yellow sticky note, and she was making something small and focused with the automatic concentration of a child for whom drawing was a kind of breathing. She looked up when he came through the door. She read his face the same way she'd been reading it since the diner, directly, completely, without performance. "Did it go okay?" she said. "It went okay," he said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she looked back at the sticky note. She pressed it with her thumb to make it lie flat. She turned it around and pushed it across the bench toward him. It was a house. Small, square, the same house she'd been drawing since the beginning, since the diner napkin that was still in his jacket pocket against his chest. The same 3 windows, the same door, but this time she'd added something new. A figure in the doorway. Small, rough, the proportional optimism of a child's drawing. And beside the house, not in front, but beside it, growing from the same ground, something that might have been a tree or might have been a person standing close, and 2 motorcycles in the yard that had gotten slightly better since the first drawing, their wheels more round, their handlebars more precise. He looked at it for a long time. "Can I keep this one too?" he said. "I made it for you," she said, with the mild exasperation of someone stating the obvious. He folded it. He put it in his pocket. He sat down beside her on the bench. Ruth, on Maisie's other side, found something to look at across the room. "There are things that are going to be hard," he said. "I need you to know that before we start." "I know that," she said. "I've never done this. I'm going to make mistakes." "I know that too." She said it without cruelty and without false reassurance. The plain, pragmatic acknowledgement of a child who had been around enough human imperfection to have made her peace with it. "You're bad at braiding hair," she added. He looked at her. "Ruth told me you tried to practice," she said. "She said you watched 7 YouTube videos." 8, he said. She almost smiled. It was close enough. "I'll teach you," she said. "It's not that hard." Outside, through the courthouse windows, the winter sun was moving across the frozen boulevard, and the waiting motorcycles were still there, still cooling, still present, still the accumulated weight of an improbable loyalty that had followed a man through paperwork and corruption and grief, and the specific difficulty of trying to do the right thing through systems that had been compromised, and the more specific difficulty of trying to do it as the kind of man he was. Claire was in the lobby when they came out. Mother and daughter did not perform the reunion for the room. They simply found each other. Maisie crossing the distance at a walk, not a run, the walk of someone who has already processed the relief and is arriving at the thing that comes after relief, which is just the ordinary, extraordinary fact of a person you love standing in a room. Claire put both arms around her. Maisie put her face against her mother's neck. They stood like that for a while. Ronan looked away. Marcus Webb came to stand beside him. "The AG's case is moving," he said. "Briggs is likely looking at a state ethics violation at minimum. The federal grant contract is under review." He paused. "It's not over for them, but the variance is dead." "Good," Ronan said. "The tenants who were displaced—" "Get me their names," Ronan said. "All 17. We'll figure out what resources look like." Webb looked at him. "That's not a small undertaking." "No," Ronan said. "It isn't." He went outside. The men were still there. He stood on the courthouse steps and looked at them. The hundreds of engines and the hundreds of men and the winter light across all of it, the breath coming visible in the cold air, the specific silence of a very large number of people not needing to speak to make themselves understood. Cutter came up the steps and stood beside him. "We overdressed," Ronan said. Cutter looked at the street. "Little bit. I told you to stand down. You told me everyone. I went with everyone." Ronan looked at the men. He looked at the bikes. He looked at the cold sky above Flagstaff and the mountains beyond it, and the road that ran north out of the city into the high desert where the Ash Fork compound was waiting, where a room with an east-facing window was waiting, where a bookshelf with 3 books and a lot of empty space was waiting for whatever would fill it over time. "Thank you," he said. Not to Cutter specifically, to the street. Cutter said nothing. He put his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at the street with him. After a while, the men began, without signal, to mount up. One by one, 2 by 2, The engines turned over in the cold morning air, and the sound of them built the way the sound of the forge always built, from one clear note to a chord to something that was no longer individual engines but a single thing, a continuous low frequency that you felt in the chest before you heard it with the ears. They began to move. Not leaving, rolling, slow, the careful procession of people who are not in a hurry because the thing they came for has been done, and going home is the last unhurried pleasure of a long day. They passed the courthouse steps without ceremony. Some of them looked at Ronan. Most of them didn't. He was not the point. He was the reason, which was different. He stood on the steps and watched them go until the boulevard was mostly clear, and the sound had gone from a chord back to individual notes, spreading out across the city streets, fading at different rates in different directions. Behind him, the courthouse door opened. Maisie came to stand beside him on the step. She had her backpack on. She looked at the last few bikes making the turn at the end of the boulevard, their taillights red against the cold morning. "They all came," she said. "They did. For you?" He thought about it. "For you," he said. "Because you mattered to me, which made you matter to them." She considered this. "That's a lot of motorcycles for one kid." "Yeah," he said. "It is." She was quiet for a moment. She watched the last bike disappear around the corner. She adjusted her backpack straps with the automatic, precise movement she'd been making since the first morning in the diner. The gesture so habitual it was nearly invisible. Nearly, except that he'd been watching it for weeks now and had learned to see it for what it was. The motion of a child who had been ready to move quickly for so long that readiness had become posture. She adjusted the straps. He looked at them. He reached over, carefully, and loosened the right strap by 2 inches. She looked at him. "It was too tight," he said. She looked at the strap. She rotated her shoulder experimentally, feeling the new setting. She looked back at the empty boulevard. "Yeah," she said. "That's better." They ate breakfast at May's. He'd called ahead. Deb had been waiting with coffee in a booth and a particular expression that was composed of many things she wasn't going to say, which was exactly the way Deb expressed everything that mattered. Claire sat beside Maisie. Ronan sat across. Cutter took a stool at the counter because Cutter understood the geometry of a table without being told. The other forge men filled the rest of the diner with their cuts and their coffee orders, and the low particular warmth of men who have done something together and are not yet ready to separate. Maisie ordered hot chocolate. She held the mug with both hands. She looked at the window, at the neon sign outside, buzzing in the pale morning, its 2 missing letters still missing because nobody had fixed them and probably nobody would. "M.E.'s," she read out loud. "It's been like that for years," Ronan said. "It's missing letters." "I know. You should fix it." "I probably should." She looked at the sign for a moment longer. Then she looked at him. "Is this where I'm from now?" she said. "The diner where I started." He thought about the question. It was a 7-year-old asking something with the specific gravity of a much older person, the question of a child who had been moving for so long that the concept of origin had become theoretical. "It's where you turn toward something instead of away from it," he said. "That's a pretty good place to be from." She considered this, turning her mug in her hands. "You were already here," she said. "You were already sitting there every Thursday." "I was." "So you were already from here too?" "Yeah," he said. "I was." She nodded. She looked at her hot chocolate. She looked back up at him with the same direct, unafraid assessment she'd been giving him since the beginning, since she'd walked across a diner with a pink backpack and sat down across from a man she'd never met and told him the truth about his own face. "You're still sad," she said. "But it's different now." He looked at her. "Different how?" She thought about it with the visible effort of a child trying to put a complicated perception into the right words. "Before it was just sad," she said. "Now it's sad. And something else, too." He held her gaze. "Yeah," he said. "Something else, too." Outside, the neon buzzed. The last bikes were settling into the lot. The desert was wide and cold and pale gold in the winter morning, and the road ran north toward the mountains and east toward the high country and west toward wherever the road went when it had run out of reasons to stop. And in all of it, in every direction the window showed, the world was the same world it had been a month ago. The same cold, the same distance, the same vast, indifferent landscape that didn't care what happened to the people crossing it. But inside May's diner, with the bad coffee and the good waitress, and the broken sign and the row of motorcycles in the cracked lot outside, a man who had spent 8 years learning to carry grief as a permanent condition was sitting across from a 7-year-old girl who had walked 3 miles in the cold toward a broken sign because she'd been taught that the sound of Harley engines meant safety. And between them on the table were 2 mugs and 1 untouched menu and the ordinary weight of a morning that had no emergency left in it. Just this. Just the ordinary, difficult, unfinished work of 2 people who had found each other at the end of the road that led away from everything and discovered, without planning to, that they'd arrived somewhere. Maisie put her mug down. She unzipped her backpack. She pulled out a pen and a folded piece of paper. A piece of paper from Ruth's house. Ronan recognized the stationery. She began to draw. He watched her work for a while. The focused automatic movement of the pen. The particular way her tongue pressed against her lip when she was getting a detail right. "What are you drawing?" he said. She didn't look up. "Home," she said. He looked out the window at the bikes in the lot, at the pale desert light, at the road going north toward Ash Fork, toward a compound with a room with an east-facing window and a rug and 3 books and a lot of empty space that would not be empty much longer. He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. He stayed.